You getting there?
Are you getting there? It's almost 9.
Good. 10 seconds.
A lot of things we do are a long time.
It's not Maggie David, right?
Okay, I'm David. Nice to meet you.
I was like, I have to keep announcing my name, so
I know you want that.
Driving the bus, so. Good? Time to shine.
This is our campaign. We do this as individuals. If you want to pass out your and you're individuals and say, straight with the check. It says thank you for being a vegan. And it talks about how we have our these are local groups that are being. Get it almost 4,500 members. Talk about anything without any results. So this is our people is different than yours because ours requires us to be reaching by individually and it's free cost. So you can hey, you don't get this and it's we're not competitive. We know that your company's specifics are a little bit different than ours, and so that we're not matched up on that. Ours are the dishes, no animal products, and it has to have no oil and added. So not maybe that has no full butter. So we call this the healthy vegan. Vegan, this is vegan healthy. So that's all we say. This is the certification.
All right, yeah, I'll take a look.
Yeah, it's free. No cost, and we use our we just want to see that out. All the people want to see that out. So we see plant-based options, we see vegan options. Yeah, exactly.
Testing, 1, 2, testing.
Can everybody see okay? Does that look good? Yeah? All right. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming on this cool morning, which I don't know about you all, but I am extremely happy to have right now. My name is Jessica Crane. I'm the Community Policy Specialist for the Blue Zones Project Southwest Florida, and one of our focus areas is food policy, specifically healthy food access for all. Can you hear me? Yeah. Is that better? Okay. Everybody good? So now this morning you'll hear about, we're doing food insecurity. You'll hear some history about our food systems in Southwest Florida, and you're going to hear a lot about food policy councils. So over the course of the past few years, we've done, as Blue Zones Project, we've done several food policy workshops in both Collier and South Lee counties. And from that, we also have food policy committees designated in each of these areas. And really what we continue to hear is everybody's interest in potentially the creation of a food policy council. So with the help of our partners, the wonderful partners we have, University of Florida, IFAS Extension, FGCU, several hunger relief organizations, Department of Health, and right now we're very fortunate to have the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council come on board. The purpose of this summit was to bring this idea to you all about launching a food policy council. And so the hope is to really educate this morning on our strengths, challenges, and opportunities in the food system here in Southwest Florida, where we go, from here, and then hopefully to launch a food policy council in May of 2020 is our ultimate goal today. So we've already contracted Tom Felke, Dr. Felke. You will meet him in a little bit. He's going to be one of the speakers this morning. We've already contracted with him to go ahead and do a food system assessment of Collier County, and we hope to do one in Lee County as well. And these will both really inform the launch of a food policy council here in Southwest Florida. And so just before I bring up the first speaker this morning, just to cover a few logistics here, we have restrooms over on the side behind us to the right. And we do have, tons of food, so please help yourself throughout the course of the morning to the food. And also please jot down any questions you have, because we will have a question and answer session with all the speakers at the very end. So please make sure to do that. We also, everybody should have gotten a survey this morning. Everybody got one? So please help us out. That's another way we're looking at, the interest, to gauge the interest in the Food Policy Council. We're going to be distributing those to the public. So just make sure, please fill those out, hand them to Nina, our amazing intern from FGCU over here that checked you all in. You can hand it to myself, or you can drop it at the registration table on your way out. So again, a big thank you to Artichoke & Company for hosting us, and thank you all so much for joining us this morning. And our first speaker this morning is Margaret Worsley. Margaret, to give you some background, is the Executive Director of the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council. She has worked in various capacities in the planning field for 40 years. Her experience includes 8 years as the Chief Planner for the City of Cincinnati, 7 years with an Atlantic City law firm, 3 years with an environmental consulting firm, 3 years as Director of Zoning for the City of Rochester, New York, 5 years in county government, and 3 terms as the Mayor of Dunkirk, New York. Margaret is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners and a licensed professional planner in New Jersey. She also taught as an adjunct instructor at the University of Cincinnati, and the University of Louisville. So please help me welcome Margaret.
Thank you. Welcome everybody. It's so nice to see everybody come out for this event. As Jessica explained, I'm the Executive Director of the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, we cover 6 counties. We cover Sarasota, Charlotte, Collier, Lee, Hendry, and Glades. And if you are a little bit familiar with the Regional Planning Councils, you probably think of us as a growth management agency. However, over the years, we have changed. We've adapted to the needs of our communities. We have 6 counties and 17 municipal governments in our region. And so as things happen, as things change, we try to help all of our communities, including nonprofits in our area, with their needs. So, let's see if I will get this right. I point here. Yeah. Over, well, as we're changing.
Well.
I'll keep going. Over the years, we've worked on a number of projects that have involved the small to mid-sized growers. After Hurricane Irma hit, I had heard a lot from the growers, small growers in particular, of what they went through with this storm and how much they lost. So we were fortunate at that time to receive a grant from the Department of Environmental Opportunity in order to assess what had happened during the storm and what the needs were of the small to mid-sized grower in the 6-county region. From that, we developed a report. There are a number of items listed that the growers felt would help them recover quickly from any future storms and some of the things that they needed. So the following year, when the Department of Economic Opportunity announced that they were going to have another funding round, we asked if we could go back in and develop food safety programs, because if we were going to help the small growers develop new markets, we needed to help them develop their food safety plans, because they would not be able to access new markets without having this plan in place. So IFAS stepped up and they went out and they worked with a number of growers and they developed those plans, and I believe Jessica is still working to develop those plans. So we have 5 or 6 of them in place now, and she may have completed even more. But then the Federal Department of Economic Administration came out with disaster relief money after Irma. And we said, hey, our growers really need help in becoming more resilient. And one of the projects they needed, or they said they needed, was a marketing brand for Southwest Florida. So EDA actually gave us a sizable grant to develop this marketing brand, and we have worked with IFAS and the University of Florida in developing new markets, identifying new markets for small growers, as well as a new brand. It's almost ready for release. I would say in the next couple of weeks, we'll see the Southwest Florida Taste the Local Difference brand come out. And we are continuing to work with the small growers. And being a planner, I hate to develop plans that sit on a shelf. So when we develop something, I like to find funding to help implement them. Well, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but the Department of Economic Opportunity, the State Department, just announced a major pot of money, $633 million, that's going to open up next year for mitigation. Not disaster relief, it's for mitigation. How do we make this region, the entire state of Florida, more resilient to future storms and disasters? So we're going back to these plans and we're looking at what our growers told us in order to tap into this funding source and take the next step in implementing that. So stay tuned, we will get to that. But in the meantime, Jessica came to us and said, hey, we want to develop a food policy council. Will you help us? So we're part of their task force, the initial task force, and we're helping to identify funding for them. We also have a 501c3 that they can use until they are fully up and operational and have their own 501c3. So we're here to help in any capacity that we can to get this project off and running. We're here to help any of the municipal governments or counties in our jurisdiction, as well as any nonprofits. So if you have a project, if you need help, please give me a call, email me, and we'll get staff on it. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here.
Thank you, Margaret. Again, again, we couldn't do this without them because we do need that arm, for funding for the Food Policy Council. So we're really excited to have them on board. And we did just have Collier County, some elected officials are interested in the Food Policy Council as well. And we're hoping to, again, get Lee County involved in that initiative. So our next speaker this morning is Jessica Mendez-Riles. Jessica is the Sustainable Food System and Ag Agent for UF-IFAS Extension in Collier County. She's a graduate of Florida Gulf Coast University with a master's in public administration and has worked experience in local government, organic vegetable farms, and universities. Jessica, so weird to say your own name when you're presenting someone. Jessica develops food system educational programs that focus on farm food production, processing, distribution, regulation, safety, and collaborates with producers, small business owners, citizens, and industry members to strengthen access to a local and traditional food system. So, Jessica, please.
I'm going to try without the microphone. If you can't hear me, I will use it. Thank you all so much for having me. Jess, thanks for inviting me to talk about food systems and agriculture in Southwest Florida. So I am the Sustainable Food Systems Agent. Depending on who I'm talking to, sometimes it's just a fancy name for Ag Agent. But I essentially work with all aspects of the food systems, and particularly I help small growers. I do work with the large producers in Collier County, but I'm usually calling them and asking them for something. So I'll talk a little bit more about that. So the University of Florida IFAS Extension, how many of you have heard of Extension? Yay, any 4-H'ers in the room? Yay! So we are essentially a land-grant university. We hold hands between the university and the farmers, and we basically look at natural resource issues. So not just agriculture, but water quality, land management, human and natural resources. We have a wide variety of programs available. And the cool thing is Extension is in all counties in Florida. So this might be a little bit hard to see, but this is basically what a local food system is. So as you can see, it's really about closing the gap between the growing and the disposing, retailing, transportation. We all know that how we can run to Publix or Walmart and get food, right? That's the obvious thing. But there's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot that needs to happen to get food to our table. So I always say the small growers I work with, even the large growers, they know how to grow food. That's not the hard part. They have a lot of information about increased yields and production practices. The harder stuff is all that in between, right? The harvesting, the labor, the packaging, the transportation. Food safety is now a really important thing. Before 2011, the Food Safety Modernization Act, we did not have any federal oversight of farms. So farms are really having to step up to the plate and demonstrate food safety. And then of course the retailing and disposing of. So we have hundreds of different products that we produce here in Southwest Florida. You can see some examples here. Cattle, fresh market vegetables are really our main commodity. We also have a lot of companies and organizations that support agriculture, so seed companies, research companies, equipment, etc., fertilizer. We also have a kind of budgeting tropical fruit area, which is exciting to see. We have the climate for it. Citrus, of course, is really big in Southwest Florida, although that has been declining. I'm sure you've heard from citrus greening. Bees. I have heard over 300 products is what we produce here in Southwest Florida. That's a lot, especially when, this time of the year when most of the country is cold and freezing. That's really when we're ramping up production. The growers started harvesting in October, and they'll harvest every week until the later part of April and perhaps May. This is also the really great thing about Florida agriculture is you can eat all year round. And even in the summer months when it's really, really hot, you can eat some of the more tropical things that you maybe have not heard of. So these are just a few statistics about ag in Florida, and I put these up here because they really are, they represent Southwest Florida as well. So ag and natural resources is a huge part of our economy here in Florida. We rival tourism, depending on the year. Sometimes tourism's a little higher, sometimes ag is a little bit higher. And of this $132 billion industry, we have about $8 billion of that share here in Southwest Florida. As I said before, crops make out about 78% of that, so fresh market vegetables. When we talk about specialty crops, that makes up about 4% of agricultural lands. When people think of specialty crops, they're like, what could that possibly be? It's your tomatoes, your peppers, your broccoli. So really, most of our agricultural land is in pasture. We'll talk about that in a couple slides. Small farms are a really big part of this economy as well. About 15% of product sales, and 7% sell directly to the consumer. And we're going to talk a little bit more about direct farmers, direct market farmers. 95% are family farms. The average age of a farmer in Florida is about 55. And the top acres are Osceola, Palm Beach, Polk, Hendry, and Blaze. So we've got two right here in Southwest Florida. So a little bit of history about ag. Cow-calf operations have always been a really important part of Florida agriculture and the heritage of Florida. We still have quite a few cow-calf operations. Typically we grow them here in Florida and we ship them out west. They fatten them up and they slaughter them out there. But we have the cow-calf side down here in Florida. Florida is the original cowboy, actually, right? People think it's Texas, it's actually Florida. Row crops are also really, have always been a staple here in Southwest Florida. We were kind of known as, we are known and still known as the vegetable basket of the United States. You have pineapple plantations on Marco Island, down here on the left. Again, citrus very important to our industry and culture, and timber. So right now, most of our timber is up in North Florida. Hurricane Michael gave a huge setback to the industry. But in Southwest Florida, we used to be a big timber, have big timber operations. So I wanted to show this food dollar because I think it's important for folks to kind of get a sense of what farming is really like in terms of the money side of it. And a lot of the research that we did, with growers, it's like if we can't be profitable, then it's really not a whole lot of sense then to grow fruits and vegetables. Farmers want to be part of the community. They are part of the community. They like to have a service. But they need to make money too, right? They're business owners. And when you look at this, it basically shows you that a very small percentage of what is being sold actually goes back to the farm. So most of the money that your food dollar is spent on is all the marketing, the transportation. Remember all those other things in the food system I talked about earlier. The thing I think is so amazing about ag in Southwest Florida is it's really a global community. So we have the UF IFAS Research Center in Immokalee. Has anyone been out there? We just had our open house. It was awesome. If you get a chance to go next year, you should go. You pull out all the tractors and you get to go on a farm tour and hear what the researchers are working on. We have over 200 students and researchers, 200 countries represented at the research center. So people come from all over the world to work in Immokalee. We also have ECHO, which is right up the road in North Fort Myers, an amazing organization. Our harvesters and workers are from Mexico and Guatemala. Immokalee has residents from Haiti and Middle and South America. And of course our buyers come from all over the world. They visit Southwest Florida and purchase this product. So as you can see here, this is kind of the acreage. So even though vegetables are #1 seller, most of the acreage is actually pasture land for those cow-calf operations. And this is really important when you're talking about conservation and water quality. our farmers, our ranchers are a very important partner in conservation efforts across the state. You can see sugarcane, citrus, and then of course ornamentals, because that's a really big industry here as well. So these are farm gate sales, essentially products that are sold directly from the farm. And as you can see, over half of that is vegetable sales. Citrus is really big as well. We usually grow the juicing citrus, not the kind that you would eat fresh. I threw this slide in here because it's also important to understand the employment part of ag. So as you can see, Hendry County has about 80% of their employment in agriculture. So again, when you're talking about culture and history, this is really, really important to people in Southwest Florida. Collier's got about a quarter, Glades 35%, Lee about 20%, so on. I wanted to share this too because a lot of folks maybe don't know what happens with a product that's grown here in Southwest Florida. So I'm going to use the example of the tomato because that's kind of one of our big commodities. We essentially are going to grow those tomatoes in the field, in field rows, right? You have your inputs of sunlight and fertilizer. Harvesting, so these tomatoes are often picked by workers on the H-2A visa program, and that's been a really important program for many of our large operators, and actually some small farmers are starting to use the H-2A program, where essentially they bring in folks from other countries to harvest. Ag is tough, right? I mean, working in the field, we don't want to do it. It's back-breaking labor. So a lot of our growers are really faced with a lot of challenge with how do I get my product to the market, because people don't want to do this job here in the United States, and it's a product that can rot, right? You can't just leave it. So there's a lot there. They go through a washing and grading process at the packing house, where they're graded usually by machine or by hand on color, size, etc. We as consumers eat with our eyes, right? So we have to have nice, perfect looking produce. They're usually packed in 25-pound boxes, or depending on what the buyer wants. They're transported across the U.S., in some cases across the world. Again, we grow fresh market tomatoes here in Southwest Florida, so this is stuff, you know, right for Publix or McDonald's. This is not going to be made into a tomato sauce. So again, what it looks like is very important. When I was showing my slide to Lewis over at Littman, he said, just make sure people know, you know, some of our products get packed and repacked multiple times. So just rebrand it, right? You might see 3 different brands of tomato, but maybe they all came from the same farm. Some of them are sold in ready-to-eat foods. So if you're biting into a McDonald's hamburger and it has a tomato on it in the wintertime, it could be that came from Immokalee, that tomato. And then of course we're going to eat it as consumers. We prepare it, dispose of it, ideally landfill. You know, composting would be great, but realistically it goes into the landfill. And on the farm side, many of the culled tomatoes are sent on for livestock feed. Some of the food pantries get those products, and usually what happens in the field is the market tomatoes are fumigated once the market reaches saturation. So this is big, this is huge, right? This is a really big food system. Most of the growers I work with, though, are direct market. And these are probably some of the people you want to tap into as you develop your food policy council. So these are the folks that are growing, usually on a smaller scale, and they're selling directly to the consumer. So that food mile, right, is a lot smaller. They're able to close that loop just a little bit more easily. And I just want to kind of finish this off and talk about some of the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities. So we are known for growing good vegetables, good quality vegetables here in Southwest Florida. We had one of our growers say, you know, when we were doing our branding and logo development, he said, you know, Florida is known as a sunny place for shady people. But Southwest Florida is known as a sunny place for fresh vegetables, right? So we are known throughout the country for our fresh vegetable production. I have been to conferences all across Florida where, you know, I meet extension agents from Alabama and all over the Southeast. I go, yeah, I know where Immokalee is. I've been to Immokalee. And I have people in Collier County and Naples that don't even know about Immokalee, right? So we're known for our high quality fresh vegetables. We have good growing conditions, we have good seasons. We have support, you know, the growers have support in terms of research in UF IFAS extension. We're close proximity to markets, so not just Southwest Florida, but the East Coast. You all know that there's a growing demand for fresh local produce. You're probably some people that are interested in it yourselves. And of course, I think Southwest Florida is a very business-friendly environment. So we have a lot of small farmers that are popping up, trying to do unique things, trying to take their product and make more of it, right? So not just growing mangoes, but maybe making mango jam and selling that product as well. And then we have the Culinary Accelerator in Immokalee, which is a commercial kitchen. If you don't get a chance to go out there, you should. It's amazing, and Ahmed's doing a wonderful job getting folks to make their product there. Some of the challenges, and this is an extensive list, unfortunately. Pest management and disease is number one for growers. We don't have a freeze in Southwest Florida typically. So that really keeps our pest and disease populations very high. We have a lot of international trade competition. So if you go look in the grocery store, a lot of our fresh fruits and vegetables are not from the US. If I'm growing a tomato in Mexico and I pay my employee $2 a day and I have to pay my H-2A visa worker $12 an hour, it's pretty easy to see how that could be a really big business challenge. There's a lot of federal, and I would say even more so, buyer requirements for food safety. So we have the Food Safety Modernization Act, which is a good thing, but really at the end of the day, Publix is not going to take on any more risk than they need to. They're going to put it on the farmer. So the farmer really has to make sure that they take food safety very seriously. Lack of financing for small farms. Again, most of our farm subsidies in the U.S. do not go to fresh fruits and vegetables. They tend to go to soy, corn, dairy, and hog. Insurance is really difficult to get for vegetable growers. Most insurance programs are built around a one and done kind of agriculture. So you plant once and you harvest once. Here we're planting every week, we're harvesting every week. So when something happens and you have a Hurricane Irma come through, they turn around and call the insurance company and say, hey, I lost my crop. And they said, it's fine, you got time to plant more. Well, they don't really, because they've already lost that market window, right? So that's a really big challenge. Tax program, we have a lot of conversion of ag lands. I don't have to tell you that, you just look around. If you've grown up or spent a lot of time in the area, you see all of those pasture lands getting converted to housing development. People that are trying to do urban ag, very unique. Our technology has changed a lot over the past 50 years, so we're trying to bring ag back to the cities. But we have a lot of zoning laws and some challenges there. There's limited land for large-scale ag. Most of our land is already bought in Southwest Florida, so we're having to do a lot of leasing. And of course, for the small growers, they have to charge more per unit for their product. They're not dealing with a ag producer that has thousands of acres that they can charge a lower unit for their cost, right? So if you're dealing with a small area, you're really having to scale up your prices. They're not dealing with the economies of scale that some of the large producers have. But the exciting thing is that there's a lot of opportunity. So we have a lot of ability to do education, and again, kind of closing the gap between the people that want local food and the people that are producing it. So that's what we're doing as a team of people, right? Trying to make that happen. Really, this local branding initiative is hopefully going to be a big part of it. Agritourism, Eat Locally has a huge hand in that. So how do we get more people on the farm? Unfortunately, as a small grower, you can't make money growing food. It's just kind of the reality of it. So you have to diversify a little bit. Agritourism is a great way to do that. Technology and precision agriculture. Most folks think that, oh, we just harvest all of our products with equipment. It is all mostly done by hand. Again, because fresh market, you have to be really delicate about harvesting that product. So if we can advance our technology, that's going to be a big game changer. And then, of course, environmental services. Like I said, wildlife habitat, carbon sequestration, groundwater recharge. We know that water quality is a really important thing here. So we need to be working with our producers to try and solve some of these issues. So here are my references if you're interested. And let me know if you have any questions. Do you want me to go back? Yeah. Thank you. Sure. Go ahead.
And again, don't forget to jot down some questions because we will have the question and answer session at the end for Jessica and the other speakers. Now, the next presenter today is going to be, can everybody hear me okay? Do I need a mic? You guys are good, okay. The next presenter is going to be Dr. Tom Felke. This presentation might look somewhat familiar for some of you that might have, I see some familiar faces that attended the Hunger Summit, sponsored by Meals of Hope, but not too long ago. But our Tom Felke, he's going to come up and share about food insecurity in Southwest Florida. Dr. Felke is the department chair and associate professor in the Department of Social Work within the College in Health and Human Services at FGCU. He received his Bachelor of Arts degree in Elementary and Special Education from Providence College. He earned his PhD in Social Work from the University of Connecticut after completing his dissertation research in Armenia. Dr. Felke spent this time employed at the Connecticut Department of Social Services as an organization and skills development manager. Arriving at FGCU in 2011, Tom now focuses his teaching and research on macro social work, the application of technology to social work practice and evaluation, and international social work issues. A major focus of his work is to use GIS, Geographic Information System, for program evaluation and research efforts. The focus of these research projects has been on the needs of seniors, affordable housing, and food insecurity here in Southwest Florida.
Thanks. There's going to be a quiz on my bio, so you're all listening to a bunch of that stuff. So good morning. I am Tom Felke. I'm happy to be here. It is nice to see some familiar faces, but it's really great to see not familiar faces. It's good to see so many people who are in the room who just have an interest in this concept that we're bringing together, because the one thing that was kind of left out of that bio is the fact that for the Blue Zones Project, I also serve as chair of the Food Policy Task Force for Southwest Florida, working with Jess as the liaison, and we have a lot of really good team members, a few who are in the room here today. So again, great to see everyone. I have 30 minutes to get through 20 slides. That's a minute and a half a slide. I've got this down to a science, but David's going to keep me on track just in case I get off, because as my students say, Felke has a tendency to get on a soapbox. I'm going to try and stay off of that today, although it probably could help me in certain endeavors. So let's take a look at what we're here to talk about. Social issues nationally and here in Southwest Florida. I get to go out and I give conversations like this and presentations like this a lot in our local communities, and it's always interesting to me. I'm a kid from Philadelphia. I spent a lot of my time up in the Northeast, in Boston and Providence and New York for all my different educational and academic endeavors. And then I came to Southwest Florida, and then one of the first conversations I ever gave, which was a presentation on older adults in Collier County, a woman got up in the middle of my presentation. She said, "All of this is horrible information. You have no idea what you're talking about." I started going back in my methodology, and she said, yeah, this is Naples. There's no poor people in Naples. And it was at that point that I said, I am in the right place. Because as my wife always tells me, when you go out, try to be nice. I really like where we live, and I don't want to leave anytime soon. Because I do tend to come out and talk a lot about the issues, but I am also going to highlight some of the really good things that we have going on. And this idea of a food policy council, you're going to see through this, is absolutely something that could pull all of these ideas together and really address a lot of these issues, even beyond the idea of food insecurity and healthy eating among individuals. So what are some of our issues that we're looking at? Affordable housing and homelessness. This, I believe, is going to be the biggest factor that we see in Southwest Florida over the coming years. If you've been paying any attention to the media, you know that affordable housing is a major issue. What you probably are not hearing more so much about is the homelessness issue, and that is becoming more important. Again, why do I bring up the fact that I'm a Northeast Mid-Atlantic kid? Because I am used to seeing individuals standing at the bottom of an off-ramp of a highway holding a sign saying that they need help. Where I hadn't seen that until recently was here in Southwest Florida. Now I see it almost on a daily basis, and I live in Naples. So I'm coming off exit 111, the same places that a lot of those seasonal residents are coming off. And I know that it's only going to be a matter of time before those seasonal residents start talking. And that is not going to be a pleasant conversation, unfortunately. And so we need to start looking at that in this broader spectrum here. Documented status. Again, a lot of media this past summer, particularly with a lot of the administrative changes on a federal level that really impacted our populations out in Immokalee, but also in areas such as Golden Gate and San Carlos Park as well, which were, again, underreported. Educational attainment. We don't tend to think of educational attainment as directly tied to these things. But as a university donor who I work with got in touch with me recently on a Sunday, said, Tom, I'm reading this thing in the New Yorker that says it's hard to study when you're hungry. Is that right? I don't know. Is it hard to do anything when you're hungry? And he said, well, yeah. And I said, then it's probably a good article. Keep reading. And so we are starting to see how educational attainment is affected by this. As an academic on a university campus, we are looking more and more at the utilization of our food pantry, which we actually have on campus. We know that our students are also using food pantries like the one in Interfaith Charities. So our students are also individuals who are affected by this. I think a lot of people think, oh, they've got cafeterias, they've got food plans, they're okay. Not the case. So that then affects how students are making their decisions around what to do. Am I paying my tuition? Am I buying food? Am I paying my fees? Am I buying food? And then how does that play into their actual educational attainment? Food insecurity, obviously the one that we're here to talk about today. Poverty tied into that, but poverty is an important one that we're going to come back to later, because generally we think that people who are food insecure are also living in poverty. Not so much the case. And particularly here when we look at some of the statistics in Southwest Florida. Isolation, social isolation, is another big issue that we see. Individuals who are staying inside of their homes. Florida Weekly and ABC7 recently just did a piece on this called The Loneliness Project that I was very proud to be able to be a part of, that looked at the idea of isolation across all age groups, not just older adults, although that's where we tend to see it. So again, individuals not even having that opportunity to sit and eat with someone, to have that kind of meaningful relationship that often occurs over food. The big thing here in Southwest Florida is that these issues are not just in Immokalee, and I tend to hear that a lot. Oh, you mean the people out in Immokalee? Oh, you mean where we see that out in Immokalee? No, I mean all throughout Southwest Florida, which for us can encompass either 5 or 7 counties, depending on the agency that you're dealing with. And the other thing is that these issues are more pressing among our senior and youth populations. Our seniors generally don't have the information to know how to access services, and our youth generally don't have a choice because they are too young to really understand these concepts, and they are really products of their environment and their family situation. So they also experience these things at a higher rate. Other one. So taking a look at some of our economic factors by county, when we look at poverty, child poverty, older adult poverty, and income inequality, the national average for income inequality is about 3.7. In our 5 counties, we are exceeding that in every single county. I don't think that that's really a surprise, because a lot of the reason we have kind of invisibility in terms of looking at social issues in Southwest Florida is because we're blinded by the wealth that is in a lot of these communities. So we get lost in that. So the income inequality, I don't think, is a major surprise, especially when you see Collier sitting there at about 4.5. But the poverty numbers are high, more so when we tend to get out to our rural areas. But we still see significant levels in each of our counties. In terms of our child poverty and older adult poverty, same thing. We see higher rates with our child poverty. The older adult poverty is something we're going to need to keep an eye on as we look at our population projections and the massive expansion that we're likely to see in that age range, which I'm going to show you in a minute here. Big thing is housing and transportation. So I kind of mentioned this, right? We talked about affordable housing. We tend to leave transportation out of that. Luckily, the Center for Neighborhood Technology doesn't. They actually take a look at this. So when you look at your housing costs throughout the 5 counties on average, we are basically at or over 30%. That is the average that Housing and Urban Development uses to say whether or not a household is housing burdened. If you are spending more than 30% of your household income toward your housing costs, you are considered housing burdened. On average, every one of our communities, our counties, are considered basically housing burdened. Then add in your transportation costs. And no, this isn't the fact that seasonal residents are coming back and out there is going to get a lot busier. What this means is that in a lot of our communities are what we call location inefficient. See that piece there about location efficiency? It's 0% across the board. When I first moved here, and I now have 2 little ones, but when I first moved here with my little one, he was 1. He wanted to go out all the time. We had to walk either in the street or we had to walk on the grass. There were no sidewalks. Again, city kid. I don't know how to deal with these kind of things. I'm navigating through parking lots trying to push a 1-year-old to the park. So we don't have great location efficiency index because of our walking, our biking, and these types of things, which are also things that are important to us. So when you start putting together your housing costs, your transportation costs, you are easily getting into the mid 50% or not higher of where your household income is going potentially, without starting to look at all of those other costs that you need to get into on a daily basis. Again, very low transit scores in terms of public transportation. We have counties that don't have public transportation. So obviously we're going to have very low transit scores. The other piece is job access. On a scale of 0 to 10, with 10 being highest, our best is about a 4.5 for Collier County. So we don't even have great access to jobs around here. We don't have a great workforce economy. A lot of our economy is built off of service and retail, which can be difficult. I had an opportunity to interview the hiring director at Hertz a few years ago when they established their headquarters here. And I was talking about this, and he said, this is probably the worst place we could be. He said, there's no workforce here. He said, we would have been better in Tampa, Miami, Fort Lauderdale. He said, there's just not the kind of workforce here. He said, we thought all these people from New Jersey were going to just migrate down here. Didn't happen. They actually had to start recruiting people from Nebraska because they figured, well, this has got to be better than Nebraska. The weather, they're going to come over here. That didn't happen either. So, and then the other part was people started moving. They didn't stay in Estero. They either came down to Naples if they had families, because the perception was schools are better, or if they were single or older adults, they went up to Fort Myers because they felt that there was better access to cultural types of activities that they were used to being able to avail themselves of back home. So, other factors are social factors, our social associations. On average, 21.9% nationally. Nowhere do we even have double digits in terms of this. We do not have strong social associations in our counties. We tend to be broken up by gated communities. You probably tend to know, like I do, the people within your gated community, if you know those people. But you generally will not really know the people in the next community over. We are basically a community built by walls, and we don't tend to get a lot of interaction between us. I'm happy because down in Collier County where I live, we're starting to build more parks, and we're starting to give people opportunity to get out, but we generally don't have what we talk about in terms of third spaces. People have a first space, that's home. Second space, usually that's work. But then your third space, where do you go to be around people? Just to be around people and to interact with them and to socialize with them. We don't have a lot of those kind of spaces here. We don't have a lot of that opportunity. We also have pretty high levels of disconnected youth. Not as much as nationally. Nationally, we're at about 12%. We're hovering in there, right? We're getting closer. Part of this is social media. But again, a big part of this is, can you get out and socialize? Now, the good thing for youth locally is we have a lot of sports groups. We have a lot of leagues. We have a lot of places where people can get out on the weekends. But during our weeks, where are the children? They're going to school, they're coming home. I know my 8 and my 3-year-old, it's the 5 kids that live around the corner. That's who they hang out with, because they're always at my house every Saturday. But that's pretty much it. And then getting back to the idea of a bachelor's degree. On average, 19.1% of the population has a bachelor's degree. Did you know that? That's low. That's a low percentage of the population. I tell my students all the time, you should be very proud of yourselves for coming to get a bachelor's degree. Only about 20% of the nation holds a bachelor's degree. Then when you move to things like your master's and your PhD, it gets into like the 10% and the 3% numbers. So these are very low percentages on average across our national population of people holding degrees. So what are some of the contributing and complicating factors? A lot of these issues that we talked about with the social issues, these are co-occurring issues. So we see cost of living increases over the past decade that have outpaced our national averages. We have riser consumer prices. As I mentioned, our gated communities and our unincorporated areas, right? A lot of people don't understand that. When people send me mail, it always says Naples. I don't live in Naples. I'm not in the city. I'm out on Collier Boulevard off of Immokalee. That's the county. I know, because when my car got broken into and I dialed 911, they said, you called the wrong number. True story. They said, you called the city of Naples. You're not in the city of Naples. Here's the number, call the sheriff. That makes a difference as to how we look at these things, how we identify who we are, and the type of access to services that we have. Our reputation, both of our geographic areas and our residential communities. I talked about it's very easy to look outside, see all the beauty that we have out here, get down by the beaches and so forth, and do things like, hey, there's a lot of wealth here. They must have a lot of really good services and opportunities here. And we do, for those who can afford them, for those who can access them. I talked about schools, right? Collier County is seen as having the better school district. And part of that goes back into policy decisions. Right? So the policy in Lee County is called school choice. I wouldn't call it school choice because you don't get to choose your school. You get to list 5 schools. You're going to get one of them. I know that when we did a needs assessment in Estero, we had one community that we talked to, and they said that the majority of the students who lived on this cul-de-sac had at least a 35-minute one-way commute to school. Right? That's not school choice, that's school assignment. That's different. You don't have that in Collier County. Everybody's districted. And why that's important is because, again, when we start talking about our communities and the need to be social and be around one another, that breaks up your communities. When you're not going to school with the kids that you see every day in your neighborhood, you develop different friendships, different relationships. Generational differences regarding social supports. Older adults tend not to avail themselves of government programs that they may be eligible for and have access to. But either they don't understand how to do that, or they come from a different generation that is that pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality, and so they just don't think that that's something that they should do. And then finally, education and sharing of information. This is probably the most frustrating thing for me. I go out and I talk to different groups, and routinely I hear, oh, I didn't know about that. Well, where would I go and learn about that? And I say things like, well, how about 211 info line? Nope, I don't know what that is. How about the elder helpline for the Area Agency on Aging of Southwest Florida? Didn't know the agency exists, so definitely didn't know they had a phone number. I get these things all the time, and that's sad. I've actually had one older adult say to me, you know what I would love to see? I would love to see a section of the newspaper just for older adults. They have those magazines for families and kids all the time. Why isn't there one for older adults? If anybody knows anybody, you probably got an idea there. Health factors, another big piece. Uninsured across the state, across the country nationally sits at about 6%. We are much higher. Our uninsured populations are significantly higher than the national average. Same thing in terms of individuals who identify as having poor or fair health. We exceed the national average in those categories. Again, probably a little bit skewed due to the number of older adults in our communities that just naturally experience different types of health issues as they age. But doesn't mean it's something we can ignore and not consider. Here's a major one. We hear all the time about the mental health issues in our community. Well, this should pretty much highlight that. On average, across the nation, the mental health provider ratio is 1 mental health provider to 310 clients. Take a look at Collier County. 1 mental health provider for 1,050 clients. That's good news for me. Social workers are the largest providers of mental health in the country. I'm training the right kind of people. I can tell my students, you're going to get a job. You can go open up your own practice. Just get through the program and get out there. Dependency ratios are also a major issue. If you know anything about dependency ratios, this basically says how many able-bodied working individuals does it take to support an older adult population. In our case, in Collier County, we're looking that it's about 58.1 able-bodied working people to support 50 older adults. Or I'm sorry, 100 older adults. So we are off in that ratio there, right? It's taking almost half of our working population to support our older adults because we have so many seasonal residents and individuals retiring to this community that's so high. What's frightening is the other side. We don't have to support children as much. That tells us we don't have enough children in this community who are going to potentially become those able-bodied working adults. So we're flipped here. To use a real estate term, we're underwater on our population. We need to do a better job at looking at this. Especially because when you look at our population projections, again, we're basically upside down. When you look at something like Collier County going out through 2040, we are going to see a percent change of about 51.4% just in the 65 and over category. Now, look at 0 to 15, 27.1. 15 to 64, 20.2. Not good. You put those two together, it's still less than half of the 65 and over. Again, we don't have enough of that level of the population coming in to support our older adults. So, what's the importance of all of this to our communities? I made mention before of the idea of it's hard to do much when you're hungry. It's hard to be successful when not eating the right foods. That's a big part of what we're here to talk about. And this has a big impact on life expectancy. A recent study done in Australia found that there's about 8 to 10 years cut off of life expectancy for those who are overweight and obese in their 20s and 30s. They were able to do an algorithm that predicts that 36.3 million years of life will be lost over the lifetime of today's Australian adult population. Men see this at a higher rate than women, and the model predicts that obesity prevalence will increase to 35% by 2025. Now, here comes the question. Tom, it's Australia. Who cares? We're not there. Well, you should, because we are getting closer to that 35% number now. If you look at the number, this map says that we're sitting just somewhere between that 25 to just under 30. There was a study done at the University of Florida that says this isn't accurate. We're actually higher. We've tripped over the 30 mark already. The other important thing was the last line of the study article that was done here, which said that what they need is a comprehensive approach to looking at all of this. So we talked about there's a fact that there's a relationship to obesity here. So many people think food insecurity. Well, you can't be food insecure and obese. Yes, you can, right? Because then it starts getting back to the idea of food choices. So it's more than just about the food you consume. It's also food access and quality. It's education, socioeconomic status. So it does come back to your income. I had a student challenge me on this, and he was like, yeah, I'm going to go out and I'm going to show you that you can eat better by going to Walmart than going to McDonald's. And he showed me all this wonderful stuff about beans and rice and pasta and everything. That's fantastic. Then he tried to compare it to a Happy Meal. And I said, if you're going to do that, make it an apples to apples comparison. Now show me how an individual can get that Happy Meal food by going to Walmart and purchasing all the same stuff without having to prep it, cook it, clean it, and any of those other pieces. And he was like, here we go. Stress. The other part of this is, are we getting adequate sleep? So again, remember what I talked about with educational attainment? If you are having issues with those other three areas, we can see how this could be having an impact on our children, on our youth, in terms of their educational attainment. Big part of this is Southwest Florida food deserts. We have a lot of them here. I have a problem with the way that they do the designation. That's just me. Because, for example, if you get out to an area like Charleston Park in Lee County, Charleston Park, I was called up and they said, well, we want to talk about the fact that Charleston Park's a food desert. And I said, well, we can't because it's not a food desert. They said, yes, it is. I said, no, it's not. Because they have a Publix that's 9.6 miles away, and they have a Winn-Dixie that's 9.1 miles away. Definition says 10. Doesn't count. Oh, by the way, there's no public transportation, and the population that is there is historically low-income minority, and now migrant farm worker community. So here in Florida, what are we looking at? About 3 million food insecure people in Florida, about 1% food insecurity rate statewide. About 55% of those food insecure individuals fall below the SNAP eligibility threshold. That means that they are not in poverty, but they can't access SNAP. 26% of food insecure, I'm sorry, the opposite. 55% of those households are above the poverty line, but still access SNAP. 26% of food insecure individuals earn too much to qualify. And about 20% of food insecure children live in those ineligible households. So when we look at those SNAP households, we've seen pretty significant rises. This is somewhat of a good thing because at least we know that people are accessing that. But at the same time, we're seeing more people needing to utilize this service. Again, when you look at the individuals who are at or above poverty, take a look. 60%, 57%, etc. are above the poverty line. So more than half of the households that are using SNAP are not living in poverty. This is what it looks like when we map it out, because I'm GIS and map. So this is what we look like. So again, yeah, we see it out in Immokalee, but look at all of those other pockets that we see. That woman who told me that there was nothing like this down in Naples, yeah, there is. We do see these types of things all throughout our communities. This is what it looks like specifically, just kind of a blow up for the Collier County area. So what are our recommendations? Obviously, educational outreach all across the board. Individuals, children, households. We got to change public perceptions. Get people to realize food insecurity and obesity can go hand in hand. A lot of advocacy. Expansion of SNAP benefits at farmers markets is one of my favorites. Reevaluation of our food purchasing policies under SNAP. Our school recess policies need to be better. My child comes home and I say, what was today? He says, phys ed. What'd you do? Ran around the dirt track. What else did you do? I ran around the dirt track. Maybe we need to look at that a little bit better. Provision of better food choices. Again, obviously something that we're talking about here. What's the point of all this? All of this can be addressed by a food policy council. If we were able to get something like this moving in this community, we would be able to address food insecurity and so much more. We're trying in terms of research, so we're starting to do some mapping of food access sites in Immokalee. This was a project that I worked on with a group of students from the University of Michigan. We literally walked through the streets of Immokalee, went in and out of different food access points. Basically, anywhere an individual could go get food. And we looked at basic things like, is there fresh fruit, is there vegetables, is there milk, is there water? And what we found was there was very low availability of fresh fruits and vegetables, and depending on where you go, certain things cost more money, particularly when you got closer to the residential areas. The other thing that we're working on now is more web-based mapping applications. So this was something that we've done recently for Meals of Hope, where we created a food pantry finder so that individuals can go on their phone, they can bring up this app, they can punch in their address, and they can find, with directions and availability of days and times and everything else, about the food pantry that is closest to their home. We just did one of these for Midwest Food Bank, and then we have another project that I'm keeping under wraps for later that we're also working with Midwest Food Bank about, particularly to identify how to better utilize food waste. So, questions, comments, concerns, observations? Oh, hold those for later. We're going to have a Q&A panel. Thank you.
All right, everyone, so we're going to take a short break right now, so be back at around 10:10, and we'll go into Rachel Shapiro.
Can you go back where Dr. Felke's phone number was on the, oh, thank you very much.
You're welcome. I know. This is the second time I heard Tom. I love hearing it. Margaret, this is Raphael. He's one of our members. I didn't know Margaret was mayor. What? I was reading that because I didn't read my bio before today, and I was like, mayor. Mayor? That's awesome, Margaret.
I was hired as the plant director of my district.
Yeah.
And the mayor there was very, very thank you. Very I said, it really is.
Maybe it wasn't. I love that. Are you guys here? I'd like to see you around.
You guys are helping out how to do that. I figure like maybe if we could maybe go in front of the slide That's before the end, that's before everybody. You're doing a good job.
Really?
Seriously, you're doing really well. That's already like you're speaking well. Yeah, you're to the point, man. It's all good. That's all good.
I'm like, we're keeping on track.
Hey, just, you're
I'm going to
right.
retain you today.
You're right. That's all you need.
I'm glad Tom came up because it was like, he kept it up.
His talk is good. Very good. I'd say it's about, I think I counted, maybe there's like 40 something. Maybe more.
Ordered for 35.
For some reason, I don't understand why people
Less
do
than
that.
half.
Yeah,
I got so many emails too this weekend. Well, I was thinking with the food, I need to tell Abby and wife to take it. We have one early for it.
that's good.
Yeah. I just don't want to step on toes because there's so many.
Yeah.
But yeah, I probably should.
Yeah.
She was trying to stop you down. She said she didn't know she was going to make it. Yeah, you should. She might have a seat. But yeah, she's like, I got her phone number. I tried to put her in touch with what's her your head guy. Well, depends on what it's for, but yeah, he's like, oh, it starts with an M. I thought maybe not. Like he's like, like this high, brown hair. I always get introduced as like Habitat as like the guy like playing acquisitions and always talking. Yes, So I was like trying to say like, well, maybe you should talk to him, trying to get them on board as a conversation, then they take ownership.
Right, that's where the direction we're going because otherwise, if they're too busy or busy, then it's not going to sustain.
Could not be true.
Trying to do more original, driven by.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I totally agree. And that's what another thing I thought, Nick, if he could see it from kind of the perspective of a work site, you know, and like do it as a work site, that like then they would understand it, you know, and like there's two workers, so maybe. But Nick, I know, he's like, he thought about it at the beginning, and he was like, after everybody came on board, and I was the first one, I was like, drop it, hey, will you see? I was like, oh, yeah.
But it's like, you know, so many things, like, I tried to
Yeah.
but I
I mean, there's got to be stuff, and you're right, like having she literally was just talking about you. Like, I need to see how to take a look at man. It's been so long since I've seen her.
you know, they've I have a background in
Lady, right? Yeah. You're like moved around. Well, I'm really happy to see you. I'm glad you came. Well, it's funny, it's coming from a planner, you know, like, isn't it funny to look at, like, the transportation and that? And I always get that on the county you know? They would benefit so much from hearing this, affordable housing. Yeah, how it connects.
Yeah.
There's a lot of hunger relief here. So that must have been what happened. It's so funny. Everything was connected and then we lost it. Okay, we should be good. Oh no. Does she love these like okay, God, like, yes.
No, know.
And like the virus, like.
That's why I don't touch them. I'm like,
I know Tom, I was like, will you bring your computer? He's got a Mac.
I just want to make sure we pull that up.
Oh yeah, you. Okay. I'm not coming back to promise.
That sounds great. Thanks, Ian. Thank you. How'd it go?
Where the thing is, you go there by yourself. I'm never Are they working? Are they up and running?
They're not up and running yet.
Okay.
With the change.
What do you think?
We just need a way, we just need a way to get these
Right.
We are working with the technology that exists. Basically, right, they have this fancy, so our system downstairs needs loyalty programs that attach to your snap bar. So we don't even need to do the they swipe and it creates an account and adds the dollars to that account. And that's not the reality. Another one is Clover, which is a bonus system I've ever heard. So they're going to have that voucher on the paper vouchers and they're not going to be able to attach that's fine.
But at least they'll be able to watch it out.
Alright everyone, we're going to go ahead and get started. We're doing pretty good on time until the bathroom line, I think. A lot of women and only 3 bathrooms, I get it. Anyway, so our next speaker this morning traveled over 2 hours to be with us this morning. We have Rachel Shapiro. And Rachel is actually with the statewide food policy council that we now have in Florida. She's an experienced wellness professional and chef with a focus on the power of nutritious food for quality of life. Her research into the food system and the quality of the food we eat led her to an interest in food policy and grassroots food advocacy. Rachel has chaired the board of the Florida Food Policy Council for the past 3 years and brings her nonprofit management experience coupled with her passion for systems and collaboration in service of the council and the state. So please help me welcome Rachel Shapiro.
Good morning. Who can tell me what food policy is? Please.
It's a policy about food.
Any of my teachers in the room will know you cannot define a term by using the same term in the definition. Anybody tell me what food policy is, please? So that was the position that I was in when I attended my first food policy summit about 4.5 years ago. It sounded important. It sounded like something I probably should know about. And so I attended a food policy workshop at the FOG, Florida Organic Growers Food Summit, up in Gainesville a few years ago in 2015. At the end of the workshop, the presenter got up and she said, does anybody in the room want to work on bringing a statewide food policy council into being? So a dozen of us stepped forward, and we were like, yeah, sure, sounds good. At least that was my attitude. I was like, yeah, I don't know what that is, but it sounds good. So we did. And that began the journey of the Florida Food Policy Council. September 2015, the steering committee was formed. For the next 6 months, we were working under the idea that the steering committee would put together a membership meeting. We planned it for April of 2016. And then that would be the end of our job. We'd elect a board, and the council would go merrily along its way. Right. I think most of you in the room can figure out how that plan went. In April of 2016, we hosted our inaugural meeting, as we're now referring to it. And that was right here in Southwest Florida in Fort Myers. It was in conjunction with UF-IFAS, and it was after one of their regional small farms conferences. And some of you might remember that who are in the room. At that meeting, we recognized that the southwest region of the state of Florida is extremely diverse from simply the southeast region, let alone the northwest in the panhandle, the central east in the middle of our state. We then proceeded to go on an 18-month tour of the state of Florida. We organized regional meetings. We tapped into local networks. We organized regional meetings. At that time, we had distinguished 5 regions of our state. And we went to each region and we were asking the same questions. What do you want to see from a statewide food policy council? We were actually the 3rd group to work on bringing a statewide food policy council into being. And they hadn't succeeded previously, so we wanted to do things a little differently. We decided that we were going to ask the public what was most important, rather than dictating what we thought was most important. As we went around the state, what really rose to the surface as a common concern in all regions was connectivity, communication, not reinventing the wheel, not working in silos. If Newport Richey has come up with a great urban ag ordinance, why on earth would Orlando spend 6 months putting together a great urban ag ordinance? So, given that, at the end of this 18-month tour, in June of 2017, we hosted our first truly statewide membership meeting. And that was in Sanford, Florida. And we actually have Heather Henderson in the room. She was part of our beginning. She joined us here in Fort Myers and worked really hard on our policy committee to bring us to the point of June 2017. We held board elections. I was at that time elected the chairperson of the board. And at that meeting, we again collected data from the crowd. We released the information that we'd gathered through the previous 18 months. Communication, networking, connectivity, resources. Those were the things that were most important to the state as a whole. At that meeting, we further zeroed in, okay, well, how can we best provide those things to all of you? We zeroed in on top priorities. We had a strategic planning session in November of that year. We decided we needed to work on our website. We needed to provide a statewide platform. That means that you folks in the Southwest, if you have a question, you can come to the Florida Food Policy Council relating to food policy in the state of Florida, and it will be referenced and seen by folks all over the state. No longer do we have to hope to goodness we meet the right person to email and possibly make that connection. So that was a big priority for us that was distinguished by the membership. We held the strategic planning meeting in November. In January, we received our first grant. Raise your hand if you've ever done any work with nonprofits. Receiving your first grant is worthy of a line item in your history. And it was the first rounding of the corner for us as an organization. We were able to hire a part-time administrative assistant. We revamped our website, and this is where we started to put into practice those suggestions that we received from all around the state. Revamped the setup, the website, we set up our Wild Apricot platform, which is event registration, newsletters, forums for the sharing of information and networking. We have a private member area, so you can go and connect. We started our monthly newsletters, and I'm going to go into that a little bit more towards the end and explain what we send out and what information is included. We also started the process to register to become a 501c3. During that year, in June 2018, we held our second annual membership meeting in Sanford, Florida. We picked Sanford because it's central. It's also super cute, and it's got great food. It's walkable. It was a great location for meetings, and I highly recommend it, actually. We had our second annual membership meeting, and then we went into the start of this year, and of course, funding is always a big challenge for nonprofits. We all have great work that we want to do, and most of us are volunteers. The board are volunteers with our organization, but funding is always an issue. How are we going to pay for this great work? How are we going to get it out into the world? In March of this year, we were actually hired by Feeding Florida, which is the statewide hunger relief network, to do a policy scan of 6 counties, Hillsborough County being one of them in the Southwest region. What we're doing is we're getting on the books any public municipal or county, well, not all municipalities within a county, but any county level and some municipal ordinances that relate to food security, food access, and food recovery. Which essentially, in our searching, we can tie in to every piece of the food system, can be related to those search terms. We were funded to do 6 counties within the state. We're just wrapping that project up now. We're working on our final report. We decided to continue that work throughout the state for the rest of the 61 counties. So while we finished the funded piece of the project, we're actually now working on the larger unfunded piece of the project, which is doing this policy scan of all of the counties in the state of Florida. So it feeds in really well with Tom's work with the county level food system assessment next year. And there are a number of other counties in the state that are all kind of getting onto this page. So again, we are acting as this, not a convener so much, but as a weaver of the threads of the food system. For good or for ill, I find myself all over the state of Florida, literally from the far west of the Panhandle all the way down to the bottom of South Florida. So I'm able to bring those resources through our networks from one place to the other, and that's one of the best services that we can actually provide for the state. Through the work with Feeding Florida, they hosted a series of convenings in these different regions. So again, it was that regional weaving of the network that gets us out there sharing resources. We hosted 3 regional meetings in the northern part of the state this year ourselves, just keeping that network alive, finding out what's most important to the folks on the ground. And I'm a little bit of a food system person junkie. So it doesn't matter if there's 1 food person in the room or 500 food people in the room. I get so much value from those exchanges. We recently held a regional gathering in Tallahassee. That's not it. But just out of, we had just a couple of attendees, and just out of that small group, it was able to clarify our vision moving forward into the next 2 years, of which I'll tell you about. And these are just some of our people throughout the years. A couple of our board members and our current administrative assistant. And these were some of our information sessions. I think that's Heather in that bottom right there. So where we're headed. And does anybody have any questions at this point? I know we're having questions at the end, but I can't help but being interactive. So feel free to shout out or stop me. All right, what's next? December of this year, the board will be hosting a strategic planning session. What we're looking at, toolkits. So as I said, out of this meeting in Tallahassee, it really helped clarify what could be of most value to boots on the ground residents, Florida residents. Most folks don't know what food policy is, and if they're getting into food business, they certainly don't know how that policy will impact them in business. So toolkits of state, federal, state, local ordinances that impact the different aspects of the food system. This has been on our radar for a while, and we're just really moving it up the priority list for the next 2-year cycle. We're also developing a 4-part curriculum. I get very excited about this, by the way. And it all comes back to the genesis of my own involvement in food policy. As my bio stated, I am not a food policy expert. I'm a wellness professional, I'm a chef, and most importantly, I'm an engaged citizen. I want to know about my food, because my food decides my health. So that's how I came to it. And I've had to learn over the years, well, what is food policy and how does it impact us? And it was in my own digging and searching as a wellness professional that I was like, oh, food policy, it's just the rules that govern how we all live together and how we interact with food in our society. Okay. Well, I have opinions about that, as I bet some of you in the room probably do. Some of you in the room probably know how to do something about your opinions, and some of you may not. Some of you may not know who to speak to or how to speak to them about how to get an ordinance passed in your local municipality about the use of locally grown food in the schools. Oh, that's school district, but. So this 4-part curriculum is going to take you from what is food policy and why is it important, to how to be a food advocate and engaged food citizen. So I digress. I do get very excited about that particular project. Next year in June, we're hosting our 3rd annual membership meeting. That will probably be in Lake Nona, although we haven't confirmed the location yet. We will be holding board elections again. We're currently openly inviting new members to the board. So if anybody is interested, please come and speak to me. We can talk about that process. We recently did a board assessment. What we scored the highest in was fun and passion. So I can guarantee you'll have a good time at our meeting, whether you walk away learning something or not. That I can't promise, but ongoing. So as I mentioned, we're doing this statewide policy scan of all the different counties.
I want to ask, out of the 50 states, are there other states? Is there a national organization, or have you been able to extrapolate other information to build your model?
Yeah.
From other states? Or do
Maggie's,
you invite them to come and join your meeting in June?
So, yes, there are other states with statewide food policy councils. Maggie's going to talk a lot about that. She's our national representative. There's a national network of food policy councils, regional, state, municipal. Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future hosts that. We're part of that national network, so we absolutely share best practices with other organizations around the nation. And also one of our board members was involved in food policy in England, so we're sharing best practices across the pond as well. If it makes sense and it works, we'll take it. We're not that discriminatory. Statewide policy scan ongoing. If anybody is interested in volunteering or getting involved in that, by all means let me know. It's fascinating, and it's a skill that you can use for the rest of your life. We do host quarterly regional meetings. We always provide a speaker or make sure that you leave with a skill. I don't believe in wasting anybody's time. If you're going to gift it to me, I want to make sure that you leave with something. So all of our regional meetings really focus on that. We host monthly Florida food forums. So they're online, video conference calls, different topics of the food system. This month it was food banks and food waste, an evolving strategy. And we had guest presenters from a couple of food banks in the Central West region. So each month we have guest presenters. We focus on a different aspect of the food system. There's 20 minutes presentation and then Q&A. And this is all online. It's free. You don't have to be a member. Anybody and everybody's invited. We send out monthly newsletters to our members. The monthly newsletters cover the food system in the state of Florida. And I have to tell you, they're freaking great. So we have an admin assistant. I can't take credit for these, but she does a fabulous job at covering grant information, event information. If you're doing an event, we want to know about it. We send out a monthly policy snapshot, which I'm going to take you to our website so you can see that. That's another piece of the value that we can offer to the state. But the monthly newsletters are just chock full of fantastic Florida information. Now, the policy snapshots. Being who I was, not really understanding food policy and really wanting to know, what I thought would be great would be if I could see a list of all of the policies in Florida that are going through the legislative session related to food. Because I always felt like I was hearing about laws that had gotten passed after the fact, after I had a chance to advocate or write my representative. So I wanted to know ahead of time, well, what's going on with food so that I can be engaged in that. So we started to do these monthly policy snapshots. So if you go to our website, which is SWFL.org, this is the home page. Up in that top toolbar, you can see blog, and we just go to policy snapshot. And back in June, which is when we started, we did a synopsis of the bills that had gone through the previous session with all of the information, the links, who filed it, what happened, where it's going next. And then we continue with that as we go through. So July was a legislation update. So we wanted everybody to know who are the members of the agricultural committees. Who would I get in touch with if I had something to say? So we did it. We did that article, and we did the House. We did the Senate. We went on to do. There's the agriculture members of the Senate. We covered the interim meetings in September. And in November, we're taking a look at all the bills that were filed in preparation for this upcoming session. So we can now have an eye on what's coming up in relation to food. This is where we get engaged. This is where we get to make a difference. Now, the Food Policy Council, the state level council, has decided that living in a diverse state like Florida, we have chosen not to advocate on any one side of an issue. We're not out to tell you what's best. What we will do is we will show you the data. We will show you best practices, and we will give you guidance on how to reach that outcome for yourselves. And we find that that's a much more welcoming and a much more it's just an approach that works better. You know, I'm not going to tell you how to do it, but I'll certainly help you if you want to know about how other ways of doing it. We look at all of you as the ones that are making the difference. We're here to support you. We're here to support you. We're here to support you, and we're here to support you. I can't promise we're always going to deliver, but we'll certainly do our best. And the council is all of you in the room. It's not it's like, you know, me and some other folks sitting in a room somewhere else making decisions about food policy in the state of Florida. We're not a government agency, we're an independent nonprofit. That was by choice. That gives us more freedom. We're not beholden to anybody in our actions. But we are made up of mothers, professors, students, eaters, chefs, policymakers. And we're folks who want to have an active role in the decisions that are made in our food. And that's what food policy is. And that's where the Food Policy Council's headed in the next 2 years. So you can save your questions if you want till the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. That really does explain what food policy is. Thank you for that. I, too, was the same one saying, what exactly is food policy when I first started, and now I know. But our next presenter is one that takes the cake on how far she actually had to come to join us this morning. At 2 a.m. she arrived. We have Dr. Maggie Adamek. She's coming all the way from also probably the coldest place that we have, Minnesota right now. What was your temperature when you left? 10. Yeah. She's a little bit happy to be here from the change. Notice the rest of us are bundled up in very winter clothing, and she should be in summer clothing right now, right? It feels good. So Dr. Maggie Adamek serves as the National Food Policy Expert for Blue Zones Project Southwest Florida. So she is our consultant for all the projects nationwide for Blue Zones. But she holds a BA degree from Carleton College, a PhD from the University of Minnesota. Maggie's nationally recognized for her unique, impactful-oriented approach to helping people and partnerships create healthy communities. Her long-standing experience with food system change from production to consumption provide clients with clear strategic counsel and support as they launch initiatives to improve local economies, public health, and ag systems. Maggie designed, managed, and led the execution of the Minnesota Food Charter, a statewide integrated policy and systems change initiative designed to reduce obesity and diet-related disease across the entire state. She's also created numerous assessment and training, guiding, and implementation of policy and systems change initiatives, creating healthier food environments at municipal, county, and regional levels. She has developed and executed marketing campaigns for healthy farmers markets, strategic planning for many food-focused organizations and initiatives, and research to inform healthy food-related policy change. She frequently serves as a consultant, strategist, and trainer for state, federal, and national organizations on how to reduce rates of diet-related chronic disease through innovative policy solutions. So please help me welcome Dr.
Is this thing on? On? Yeah, great. Well, I'm not here very long, but every minute of warm weather is a minute well spent, and I was so excited to take my wool socks off when I got here this morning at 2 a.m. And I'm just so glad to be here with all of you. Thanks for creating healthier food environments, on creating healthy food systems, and on communities claiming and charting their own food futures. So that's what I'm here to talk about today, and I'm going to talk about it at two scales, different places. I say I work from Hawaii to Florida and Wisconsin to Texas, so I'm hopscotching all over the place, and I also do a little bit of work in Canada too, so that provides an interesting perspective where we share a common continental geography, but we also have some differences in the way that we think and do our food and ag. So I just wanted to share a little bit about my background. My dad grew up on what we now call a diversified organic family farm. What he called it was a Depression-era dirt farm, where they had no electricity and no running water, and there were 7 people living in 2 rooms. This is in central Minnesota, so they did have a wood stove, but my dad and his 2 brothers had to sleep in a lean-to where you could see outside between the wood planks, and this is a sub-zero kind of situation. And he grew up during the Depression, so they were too poor to afford a tractor, so my dad grew up plowing the fields with a couple of draft horses. So how times have changed, huh? When we see the slides and learn about things like precision agriculture. And 3 of my 4 grandparents, English was not their first language. They came from immigrant families. My mom was a city girl, and so my mom taught me how to can and garden and cook, and my dad's brothers and my grandfather farmed. My one uncle was a conventional dairy farmer, and my dad's younger brother was a conventional turkey farmer. And because my mom and dad were school teachers, I spent all summer, every summer, on the farm, and you couldn't go to a small town in central Minnesota without me running into relatives, because my dad had 65 first cousins. Yeah, Bohemian Catholic. It was actually kind of scandalous. It was a mixed marriage. My grandmother was a Norwegian Lutheran, and they had to elope because of the scandal that it created. So I come by this work honestly. I feel it's part of my cultural and family heritage, where I have a foot in the country, and a foot in the city, and a foot in the kitchen, and a foot in the field. So those perspectives really inform my passion for food, from farm to fork or farm to table, and have given me the cultural grounding and understanding of what it means to work with urban, suburban, and rural communities on food and farming issues. And I've also had a long-standing career. In fact, the first food issue I worked on when I was in college was actually around issues that migrant farm workers faced. So I've just always had a passion for the people who grow and produce and prepare our food, and I just try to do my part to support communities who think about that. So that's just a little bit about me. Also, I'm a hardcore Prince fan, so if any of you, yep, thank you. If any of you are also fans, come talk to me afterwards. I want to just provide a little bit of context to what's going on in Florida at the statewide level, and why food policy matters, and why local communities should care about getting involved in food policy. The fact is, I think many of you know, that we face a health epidemic in the United States around diet-related chronic disease. We have ever-growing rates of type 2 diabetes, including with children. Remember when my grandmother had it, we used to call it adult onset diabetes. They don't call it that anymore. And we continue to see a growing increase in obesity, which of course also means we're seeing increases in heart disease, cancer, stroke, and other lifestyle-related diseases that a healthy diet can prevent. I also know I'm sort of in this sandwich generation where I didn't grow up with a microwave oven, and I really, really want, I mean, I live in a city home of General Mills, Betty Crocker. I really cakes from cake mixes, and my mom wouldn't buy them. It was like, if you want to make something, you can cook it from scratch. So I grew up in a from scratch household But a lot of my friends grew up in households where they were heating and eating a lot of prepared convenience foods or eating out a lot. So I sort of see myself as that transitional generation where we went from the kind of lifestyle that my mother had growing up, where we grew, canned, and ate a lot of the food that we consumed as households, to the current situation where it's a lot of eating out, a lot of takeout, a lot of processed and prepared foods. So here we are. We know that this dietary change has created this massive increase in healthcare costs, and you can see here that Florida spends about 6% of its annual healthcare budget on obesity-related issues, and you can also see that annual cost at the national level for obesity. So we know it's expensive to not eat well. And one of the things I tell communities who are trying to get a handle on well-being in their health, because healthy people want to raise their children in, they're the kind of communities that people want to move to. And so what we're seeing is a lot of communities starting to say, we want to be that kind of community where we have amenities that promote and support our well-being. And if we don't start taking this into our own hands, decisions are going to get made for us. And so we see a lot of communities saying, we got to put the lid on our healthcare costs. This is a concern for our employers. And we also want to be the kind of community that people want to live and contribute to in terms of their workforce. So those are the kind of concerns that get communities thinking about food policy work. And I will tell you that a lot of these communities have said, junk food is too easily accessible, healthy food is hard to get to and too expensive. In the places we spend time, there are a lot of unhealthy options, but there aren't the kind of healthy options we have. Plus, people don't know how to eat healthy, prepare healthy foods, or make healthy choices anymore. Times have changed. And so we have a food skills issue at play too. So you can see here with Blue Zones, the Blue Zones project, just like in Southwest Florida, works with communities all over the country to help make the healthy choice the easy choice, whether it's reducing tobacco use, increasing healthy eating, or increasing physical activity. My hat's the healthy eating hat. I'm the food policy person. And you can see here what Blue Zones has learned is when we look at the factors that determine our well-being, only about 20% of it is genetics. There's an awful lot you can do with lifestyle, the place you live, and your access to medical care. So you can see the Blue Zones projects really focus on creating environments that promote healthy behaviors. And that's why with our food policy work with Blue Zones, we really focus on policy systems and environmental changes that lead people to be able to make healthy choices that are affordable, that are easy to make, and that are consistent and reliable. Oops. So the CDC says healthy places are those designed and built to improve the quality of life for all people who live, work, worship, learn, and play within their borders. And Dr. Felke kind of described some of these factors that really underlie what we would call social determinants of health: income, access to transportation, ease of physical activity like parks and being able to easily get to parks with your young children, all the factors that make it easy for people to make those healthy choices, where every person is free to make choices amid a variety of healthy, available, accessible, and affordable options. When I was a little kid, my family moved overseas for a couple of years. My mom and dad did some exchange teaching, and I was 5 years old. And that was back in the day where they had Pan Am, and the flight attendants had the little hats, and they had the little suitcases, and I was pretty enamored. I thought that was great. And I remember walking on these airplanes to hopscotch across the world, and walking down the aisle of the airplane with this haze of blue smoke over my head. I was pretty tiny, and I could walk under the smoke. Well, by the time I was in high school, you could no longer smoke on the planes, but you could smoke in the airports. And by the time my son was 5 years old and I was taking him on vacation, what we would see is there was a smoking room, a dedicated smoking room inside the airport. And then by the time he was in early high school, there was no longer a smoking room in the airport. Now, I'm Minnesota, right? There was a concrete bunker out at the very perimeter of the airport where people would have to walk outside in 40 degrees below zero to get their nicotine fix, right? So if we look at this 25 or 30 year or 35 year trajectory of the fact that it got easier and easier to make the healthy choice because they had made policy and environmental changes that made it hard to smoke or use tobacco, and made it easy to be in smoke-free environments, right? And so I think about our food policy work in the same way. We're on the front end of saying, we know there's a lot of environmental conditions here that make it hard to choose healthy behaviors. It's actually easy to choose unhealthy behaviors. There's lots of fast food. It costs more to buy healthy food. You have to make a couple of stops to be able to get the healthy options you need. It might take more time because you have to drive to certain places to get the healthy food you want. And so what we try to do in Blue Zones is help communities think through, how do we change our food environments to support healthier behaviors, no matter where people spend their time, at school, at work, in their community, etc. Sorry, oops. I'm not very good at these tech. I got it. I'm really not very good at it. Is it okay? Okay. Cute. All right. So why do we want to transform the food environment? Well, as I said, what it means is the healthy choice is not the easy choice in many communities. A lot of communities get to a point where they say, we're ready for something else. We're ready for a different kind of food environment where we have more of what's on your right and a lot less of what's in the middle and on the left. And certainly we want to support people's choices, but we also know what research tells us is the fewer unhealthy choices people have and the healthier, more affordable choices people have, they're more likely to make the healthy choice. So what we want to do with Blue Zones work and with food policy work in communities is create as many nudges and prompts and opportunities for people to make the healthy choice. So I did want to talk to you a little bit about healthy eating. The environments we spend our time in are the most important determinant of whether or not we'll be overweight or suffer from diabetes or other food-related ailments. So if you go into your workplace and there's a cafeteria and they have things with deep fryers, they have lots of deep fried chips, they have deep fried chicken, they have lots of high-fat, highly processed foods, lots of sugar-sweetened beverages. If that's where you're hanging out 8 to 10 hours a day every day because you got to show up to work to make a living, you're more likely to face these kinds of diet-related health issues than if you spend time in an environment where you have a lot of healthy options. That seems like a pretty sensible outcome. The other thing we do is, as people, we make over 200 decisions about food every day. Most of them are not based on hunger, but rather by what is around us. So they're based on convenience, right? So we have all these decisions to make every single day. Do I have time to cook? What am I going to cook? Am I going to get home in time to feed my kids before they have to go to practice, right? The sort of cascade effect of all the choices that you have to make around food every day. But it really is about what is around us. And then finally, we already know not only the health outcomes associated with poor food choices, but we also know the economic drag it creates on communities in terms of healthcare costs, worker productivity, absenteeism, etc. So when communities are starting to think about how to change their food environment, what I do is I talk to them about there being four ingredients for change. And so when communities are trying to make the healthy choice the easy choice when it comes to food, many food policy councils work in one or more of these four areas. The first one is, to what extent do you have a really robust food scene in your community? Are there cool food trucks? Do you have a farmer's market? Do a lot of people garden and grow their own vegetables? Is there an active restaurant community that provides a lot of leadership and creativity around food? And that doesn't have to be expensive things, but it is this lively, flowering food culture that really is about the people and the place that you live. So that's one thing a lot of communities and food policy councils work on, is saying, how can we foster and support the development of a thriving food culture? Because where there's a thriving food culture, there's also readiness in the community to take on some of these other policy issues that address more systemic factors like access to healthy food. I can't name a single community in the United States that I've worked in, and I've worked in a lot of them, that has said, you know what, everybody here knows how to plan, prepare healthy food. They know how to garden, they know how to preserve, we're good. Every community I work in says, you know what, we have a serious food skills gap in our community, and it's not just with our kids, It's with adults, it's with the elderly. People don't know how to make healthy choices. They don't know how to prepare healthy foods. They don't know how to plan healthy meals. They don't know how to garden. They don't know where their food comes from. They don't know how to preserve food. And so a lot of food policy councils oftentimes say, what can we do to help strengthen the food skills in our community at a population scale, right? Another thing that a lot of food policy councils look to is they say, well, we got to try to make access to healthy food easier, more affordable, more consistent, more reliable for all kinds of people who live in our communities. Whether it's employers thinking about their employees, whether it's people thinking about seniors in their communities, whether it's folks thinking about food insecure populations, as Dr. Felke laid out. How is it that we can create the healthiest food environments in the places where people spend their time? And then finally, one of the things I like about working in Florida is not only are you a big ag state, Minnesota is the 5th largest ag economy, but you actually grow food. We grow feed, right? So we grow a lot of corn and soybeans. We feed all the livestock. You know, we feed that steak and that chicken that's on the plate next to all the beautiful fruits and vegetables that you guys grow. And so one of the things that's really great about food policy work that we see in Florida, and you've heard it from the speakers this morning, is this seamless integration between the connection to agriculture as economic development, as cultural development, and as a food source for the eaters in this region with creating healthy food environments. So there's an awful lot of food policy councils that work in the middle of the supply chain trying to create networks and pathways for food grown nearby to get to eaters who are eating nearby. So that's the other sort of dimension that people work on. So let's talk a little bit about what food policy councils are. We heard at the statewide level the wonderful work that's going on in Florida, and there are, to your question, a number of states that have some sort of leadership body at the state level that's thinking about food policy. And as we heard from Rachel, a lot of that food policy at the state level focuses either on legislative policy. And here, Tom, I stole this wonderful picture from Florida Gulf Coast University. I just love this picture. The students at Florida Gulf Coast University are so amazing, and there's just such a terrific amount of leadership and work by students and faculty alike on healthy eating and local agricultural efforts. So I just wanted to start out by talking a little bit about when a community or a region decides to establish a food policy council. What is that and what do they do? Well, the answer is it depends, right? Some of them consider themselves networks of like-minded, interested people. So it's people who are really interested in food and ag issues, and they want to come together and they want to learn and they want to talk and they want to network and they want to partner. Some of them set themselves up as a 501c3 nonprofit organization. They're their own thing. They operate, oftentimes through grant funding or membership dues, and they focus on everything from education to policy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Another permutation of this is an advisory body, and sometimes these advisory bodies are either under an umbrella organization like a food bank, a large hunger relief organization. Oftentimes they're also affiliated with a local body of government. So they may have some kind of active relationship or appointment with the city council, with a county government, or in the case of one of the examples I'll share with you, joint powers where it might be a couple counties and a couple cities and a couple small towns and a couple townships. So there's a lot of different variations. In the Twin Cities where I'm from, we have Homegrown Minneapolis, which is the City of Minneapolis's Food Policy Council. And then across the river, in St. Paul, it's not as cool as Minneapolis, everyone who lives there knows that, but they have a joint powers one where the county government and the city government share their food policy council, and that food policy council makes policy recommendations to the county government and to the city government. So they actually legislate in both spaces at the local level. And so oftentimes what they do is develop, advocate for, and establish policy and systems changes, and many times they'll also oversee implementation of those things. And so typically you'll see these food policy councils focusing on a variety of things. They might want to pick as one of their priorities improving access to healthy, safe, affordable food for residents in the community. Many times what they'll do, as Tom pointed out, is they'll focus on what we might call food deserts, where there's limited access to healthy options for a variety of reasons. Another important activity is promoting and fostering cultural, community, and economic development around food. And then doing things like building infrastructure to support local ag and food production or food distribution and sales. So you might have heard that term food hub. There's a lot of food policy councils that want to strengthen the pathways and channels to get food grown nearby into people's kitchens or into institutional food services or into grocery stores, so it ultimately ends up in people's kitchens. So there's a lot of activity in these food policy councils around the country thinking about how they can capture more of the market share of local eaters' diets while they're supporting local agriculture at the same time. And then finally, as I said, a lot of them are working on enhancing food skills of community members. One example, I was on the inaugural I was an inaugural council member for Homegrown Minneapolis in my hometown, and the first food skills related activity that they undertook is they did an inventory of all the commercial kitchens and like church basement kitchens available across the community, created a directory, and then offered canning workshops on a regular basis so that people knew in communities that if they didn't have the equipment or the space where they lived, there was a place in their neighborhood that they could go to if they wanted to learn how to can and can their own foods. So that food skills thing can be cooking classes, or it could be an activity like that inventory of places where people can learn how to can and have the equipment that they need. This is generated and posted. Rachel mentioned that Johns Hopkins Center for a Livable Future has within it an initiative that focuses on what they call food policy networks or food networks nationwide. You can see how many of them there are all over the country. And when I looked at it, even in Minnesota, their data's a little off because I know there's more in my home state than what you see here. And we have everything in Minnesota from regional networks to, as I said, these sort of more locally focused food policy networks. But the reason Johns Hopkins has this project on food policy networks is because there's such a proliferation of interest in communities around the country saying, we want to have a say in our food future. And we want our food future to be healthy. And we want our food future to support our local farmers. We want our food future to represent the cultural heritages of the people who live in the community. And we want our future residents to have access to healthy food on a regular basis. We want to say in what our food future looks like. So you can see that many communities around the country have taken that charge very seriously and set up their food policy networks. And there was such a proliferation of this kind of activity that Johns Hopkins said, you know what, there really needs to be sort of a national clearinghouse. And so they have this wonderful searchable database of policies around the country. They've published some wonderful reports about lessons learned from food policy councils around the country. And it's led by, I call the godfather of the Food Policy Council movement, Mark Winnie, who's really smart, does great work, and it's a really wonderful clearinghouse of information and resources to go there that they offer. So how do food policy councils work? They typically are some kind of committee with a formal advisory role to local government. They may be hosted or affiliated with an organization, as I mentioned. And sometimes they're a volunteer network, so there really is a span. Since I can advocate, I'm going to tell you what I think works best. I think that's part of my job to come to you today and say, I'm really excited to see you laying the groundwork to go for it. My recommendation is that it is some kind of body that has some kind of formal advisory role with units of government, whether it's hosted or affiliated with that branch of government. You know, I'm less committed to that, but I do believe that it should have some sort of formal acknowledgement by local bodies of government so that you have more teeth and more influence in the recommendations that you make. So there's a lot of different options, but I have my favorite recipe for what I think works best. So why are food policy councils important? Well, instead of working piecemeal, you know what? We want to create a policy for backyard beekeeping, so let's just work on that. You know what? We want to improve availability of healthy options at local food pantries. You know what? We want to see if we can support backyard chicken coops so people have healthy eggs that they can eat for breakfast in the morning. You know what? We want to create an opportunity for people to have access to community gardens and make sure that those community gardens are there to stay. Well, if you work on project by project without any formal structure, you're a lot less likely to accomplish the broad changes for the food future that your community wants than if you have an organized working body with a strategic plan, a set of policy objectives, and an integrated strategy across a lot of different efforts and across a lot of different stakeholders. You're more likely to affect the long-term systems change you're trying to enact if you have a working body that has a strategic plan, a formalized network in place, and a way to work on it together. So it really does enable effective policy and systems change in a way that working issue by issue doesn't, because there you have advocates for a specific issue rather than an organized base of stakeholders and an organized body advancing a shared agenda together. And so it really can work to improve community health, reduce diet-related chronic diseases, enhance self-reliance, and promote economic opportunity. And as I said, it provides a formal means for a community to have a say in a meaningful way over their food future. You're taking your food system back into your own hands as a community, and you're able to influence and drive more of that agenda. So I want to talk about the difference between little p and big P when it comes to policy change. Little p means it's policies that are made within a unit of local government, so it might be a decision by a division rather than something that requires some type of ordinance or act by the elected body. Or it could be a policy within an organization like a food bank that says, we're going to create a healthy procurement policy, and we're going to work with all of our member food pantries to implement that so they can increase their acceptance of donations of healthy items and decrease the distribution of unhealthy items to our program participants. In that case, you don't need to pass a local ordinance. It is a policy, or in the case of a school district, they can say, we're going to set a procurement policy that prioritizes purchasing local foods grown or prepared by nearby farmers or nearby food processors. That doesn't require an act of the school board. It can require a decision by the leadership of the school district. So there's a lot of really meaningful systems and environmental changes you can make by little p policy. Big P policy are the ones that require some kind of decision by a unit of government. So it might be an ordinance that supports urban agricultural activity, or it might be an ordinance that supports backyard beekeeping, and it requires some sort of formal act of a political body. This is like 2-point font. I don't know how the folks in the back can see, but I'm happy to share with you. So I've talked to you a little bit about the kinds of things that food policy councils work on. A good example is a lot of folks, as Tom pointed out earlier, many communities are facing issues of food insecurity, and a lot, as Dr. Felke said today, a lot are children. So many people are thinking a lot about how do we make sure that our community members who don't have access to a level playing field when it comes to affordable, healthy food, how can we work within the hunger relief system to increase the availability of healthy options and decrease the availability of unhealthy options? So that's something, for example, in Minneapolis, it was not a policy that our city council passed, but it was an initiative that our local public health department took on in partnership with one of our local food banks, and not only passed a procurement policy that said we're really going to shift what we accept in terms of donated food items. We're not going to accept the stuff that we know is going to cause a problem in terms of people's long-term health outcomes. And we're going to provide the resources and support to our local food pantries so that they can store fresh produce, perishable, healthy items. And we're going to train our food pantries on how to do attractive merchandising and behavioral nudges and prompts to encourage the healthy choice among program participants. And we're going to pay for the merchandising, the labeling, the signage, the shelving, the baskets. So we'll provide not just the training, but the resources for food pantries to feature healthy options and encourage those healthy choices by their program participants. That's something that our Food Policy Council worked on. They'll work on things like healthy institutional service. So county buildings, city managed facilities, parks and recreation concessions and vending machines. You can pass policies that place a priority on increasing healthy options. You can also do what I call community food assets development, which is make sure your farmers markets are rocking it, make sure that people can grow food in the city for local markets, make sure that people can reliably have access to community garden space, or even help through an economic development division of a local government in getting a food hub up and going. So there's a lot of different types of issues that food policy councils work on. When I see food policy councils working really well, and it's so exciting to see that you have such a great model at the state level to follow, it's the ones that have a strategic plan, where people have done their homework, the council's done their homework, they've surfaced the issues and opportunities that the community is interested in working on or needs to face, and then they identify some clear, proven strategies about how to pass policy and work on initiatives that really can move the dial on healthy outcomes for the community. So every community picks different things. There are definitely some common general buckets, as I've described, but this is really your opportunity to create a customized portfolio of work that makes the healthy choice the easy choice for the region. So what does membership look like? Well, the easy answer is it depends. But typically, food policy councils, they sort of pick a number of people, and I always say strike a balance between not too few and unwieldy, right? So my sweet spot for food policy councils is somewhere between 16 and 30, with the assumption that people are busy, and so you generally have about a quarter of people who can't make a meeting for one reason or another, because I always want a dozen warm bodies in the room, right? So I have this sort of critical threshold that I think makes it effective for deliberation and discussion. And then what folks do, there's sort of this head count piece. And then people oftentimes say, well, we need representation from our local processors, whether it's animal products or it's fruits and vegetables. We also need local restaurants, people who are in the culinary sector who are doing really innovative work. We really want somebody from Extension, both on the ag side and the nutrition side. Oh, we really want somebody from city government, from the planning department or the policy aide to the mayor. So what every food policy council will do on the front end of its development is say, what types of sectors and hats do we need around the table? And then let's stack. So I often see with food policy councils, they'll say, this person is a farmer's market manager who's also married to a suburban mayor, who is bilingual, who has a degree in horticulture and organic production, and who's a millennial who's really well networked in the natural foods grocery store, right? So they do that kind of, walking through somebody's bio and getting a sense of how many hats and strategic connections do they bring to the table. So it's not just those sectors, it's also thinking through personalities and thinking through representation. So not just sectors, but age, cultural diversity, income diversity, even neighborhood diversity. Sometimes you want to make sure, I've seen a lot of councils where they go, oh, we picked everybody from one side of town, maybe we need to revisit this, right? You also want to make sure that there are term limits. So people like that because then they say, okay, I'm not on the hook forever. That's a plus. And then people also say, okay, you've gotten a little old and tired. Time to go. Let's bring in some fresh blood. So term limits have some benefits on either side of that equation. It's also helpful to have some people with policy advocacy experience at the table. In the case of Minneapolis, when I was on my food policy council, we had task forces that were issue focused based on our strategic plan. I co-chaired that task force with a city staff person. So each of the task forces, the city had a council member and a city staff person, which was super helpful because I had a general idea about how policy worked, but they were the ones that said, okay, Lisa Bender, here's how she's going to want to hear this, or that's a no-go this session, but if we move this through this way, or let's not have this go through city council, let's just create a policy in the mayor's office that's really about city government. So that experience with, seasoned policy strategists can be super helpful. And then as that part of that too is really the engagement of staff from local government. Here's another one, another ingredient in Maggie's recipe for successful food policy councils. Have someone who is at least 0.3, preferably 0.5 FTE to support the council's work. If it's all volunteer driven, that's really a big ask. But if somebody somewhere involved in that council can be the coordinator and supporter and shepherd and advancer and strategic, strategic player, that can be really helpful. And it's everything from meeting minutes, agendas, following up with to-dos. But it can also be things like our city Minneapolis has a food policy coordinator that's a city staff position full-time, and she's brought in $500,000 to do research and work on aligning and creating a policy agenda for our 25 farmers markets. She's brought in $300,000 to help develop a food action plan for the city in partnership with the university. So they can also help coordinate the funding, which is such an important part, not just for the staff person, but to do some of this really great work. Because there are good resources out there to support this kind of work. And then finally, I would say formal and non-formal leaders. So an example of this is I work in some communities where you have people that are wearing particular formal hats, the CEO of a local food bank, the manager of a major grocery store, but then you also have non-formal leaders who just are really good at networking and they know everyone and they're really digging on food issues. And so they actually, even if they don't have a formal hat, they might just be someone who works at a local publishing company that's really passionate about food, but they know people. So really thinking through who those non-formal leaders are, or grassroots leaders that really know everybody in the neighborhood, and therefore if we're talking about organizing around a particular issue, they can turn out the stakeholders to move the work forward. How am I doing on time? You're doing good. Okay. Okay, I want to share some examples. I've sort of been talking mostly about Minneapolis, but I do have other stuff in my hat here to pull out. This is another story from the frozen north. This is the Cass Clay County Food Partners. And this is, the reason I picked this one is I thought you might be interested because of the way your county is constituted. Cass Clay County straddles two states. It's Fargo and Moorhead, with the Red River running through it. And Fargo-Moorhead doesn't have the kind of storms off the ocean that you have, but they've had serious flooding over the last couple of years in the spring. And so they have some of those similar resilience issues around agriculture that you all face here, but a little bit different in terms of the climate. Their growing season is only, I thought it was short where I live in southern Minnesota, but their growing season is really short. It's about 3.5 months a year. And what they got interested in is working on those 4 domains. We don't have a very good local food culture here. We don't have good restaurants, we just have chains. There's a bunch of farmers who grow great food nearby. We don't have a farmer's market. We have a large new immigrant population who are resettled refugees. They're looking for space to farm and garden and they don't have access to it. Our young people don't have the food skills they need. They had a whole bunch of issues that they saw that they wanted to work on. And so they, first of all, their regional economic development entity, which covers 2 counties on either side of the state border, covers 2 major towns, Fargo and Moorhead, 9 small towns, and then rural townships that, and some unincorporated communities. And so they have a joint powers agreement through this regional entity, just like you heard this morning, and they developed their food systems plan. So they did an assessment about the needs, they identified the policies and work that they wanted to undertake, and then the joint powers through the regional economic development agency formalized this advisory board and appointed it, and then they did things like, okay, this is never gonna go over in Fargo, we're gonna have to start in Moorhead first, then we'll move to this town, and then 3 towns in, then we'll circle back around to Fargo and get this ordinance passed. So one of the things they were able to do is pass community-specific policy, but policies that they also wanted to see get implemented across the region, they navigated things very carefully and were able to sort of move the policy agenda forward community by community until it was like, oh, well, there's a critical mass, we might as well do it too. The other thing that they were able to do as a result of this joint borders thing is get both the commissioners of agriculture at the state level, because there's a big ag economy in this part of our geography, and so they had a lot of support and interest. So they've continued to evolve their work, but they have about 8 or 9 years of successful policy work under their belts, and have re-upped for a second kind of strategic plan, and also have been very successful at getting state and federal grant funding to support their work, and again, lots of involvement from Extension in this body. A little closer to home, the Pasco County has created a Food Policy Advisory Council. They have a super terrific website. So if you are curious about what do agendas look like when a local food policy council does its work, what do they actually get done at their meetings? I'm going to read their meeting minutes. They've conducted research, they have a strategic planning process underway, they have several key priorities. The other thing I really like about the Pasco County Food Policy Advisory Council is they've passed policy, they've done some really good work on urban agriculture, and they've also hit a lull now and then. And one of the things that's important to understand about food policy work at the local level is the rhythm of the work. Sometimes it's going great guns, it's just like agriculture. Sometimes there's a fallow period. And so I think that you can see by looking at what Pasco County Food Policy Advisory Council has done that there's a lot of really wonderful work that they've undertaken at the local and county level. And you can see some of the policy language that they've introduced and had passed. They're also busy working on a food hub. So as I said before, their interests are access to healthy food, local food infrastructure, healthy food environments, and a little bit of food skills on the beekeeping and chickens front. Okay, I'm gonna grab a little water while I talk to you about Kansas, which, as I understand it, Minnesota's weather is getting to be a little bit like Kansas, and Kansas's weather is getting to be a little bit like Florida. So their agriculture is changing. So Douglas County is a rural county, but it's a university town, just like you have a presence of higher education here. And I'm going to do a little bit of reading here because I want to share with you what they've done, which is super interesting. There was a joint city ordinance between the county and the city that established the Douglas County Food Policy Council. So it's a city-county advisory board who identifies benefits, challenges, and opportunities for a successful local food system. They have done things similar to what your state food policy council has done. They've hosted convenings on the regular, and then they created a county food systems plan. So they said, this is our strategic roadmap for our county's food system for the future, and here are the things we can do as a food policy body to get us there. They have done such amazing work that it won an award from the Kansas chapter of the American Planning Association. They've done a ton of work on rebranding their county's incubator kitchen. They have a farmers market promotion grant from the USDA to work with the farmers markets across the county. They've been selected by the county's strategic plan revision steering committee to create a food plan for the entire county. One of the things that really interested me when I started working in Southwest Florida with the Blue Zones Project is that your regional economic development plan not only talks about agriculture, it also talks about one of the primary economic development strategies addressing childhood obesity. So there's these really intriguing opportunities that really are about healthcare costs and your future workforce with supporting local agriculture. They've also conducted a feasibility study with the intent of doing that market analysis to create a regional food hub. They've also expanded urban ag and community gardening, including a 5-acre incubator farm, Market Match, which is when folks who are SNAP eligible go to the farmer's market. They can not only use their SNAP dollars to buy things at the market, they can also get $5 or $10 extra to spend on more produce. They have a land lease program to lease vacant properties for food production. And they're also providing incentives to grocery stores to have a presence in food desert areas. So they've accomplished a lot, and one of the things I encourage you to do, I had a slide in the other version of this, but there is one pull-down tab when you go to their website that has an unbelievable number of reports. And so I want to talk to you about one of the amazing opportunities you have here. The leadership and the support of academic institutions and academics like Dr. Felke and his students, what I've seen is when food policy councils partner with Extension and other units inside universities, there's a bunch of research and a bunch of access to grant money that can really help move the dial on specific policy initiatives or specific change efforts that you're trying to make. Leavenworth, Kansas is a university town in Douglas County, and when I looked at the sheer volume of reports, it's actually kind of a lot. I said, my gosh, you must have the entire faculty doing food system studies, because it just went on and on and on. But essentially why they do this is they say, we want to understand the problem, we want to understand the opportunities and challenges, we want to know what it would take to do this, we want to make sure that we have readiness as a community, let's go. And so that kind of deliberation, they've got good thinkers doing the homework so that the Food Policy Council can say, what's the best decision to make here? What's the right path forward? So they're very deliberate and thoughtful about using studies and research to help inform their decision making. And what that means is they're not wasting time with things that don't work or things that weren't really needed, right? You want to have successes, and so that's what they do to help make themselves successful. Okay, I'm going to share a little bit about healthy food and hunger relief. I explained to you what happened in Minneapolis. In Northwest Arkansas, one of the food banks took on a little pea policy project. And this is a food bank that distributes food to a network of dozens of food shelves across an entire region. We say food shelf in Minnesota, food pantries. And so what they did is they created a nutritious foods procurement policy and said they had preference for donated foods that were healthy. And they had a list of foods that sort of fit that umbrella, and they had a list of foods that didn't fit that umbrella, but it was fairly non-judgmental in the description. They didn't call them unhealthy, they just said we place a priority on these kinds of items. And then they began a marketing process to educate the grocery stores and restaurants that were sending the additional food that they had pulled off the shelves and were donating through the system. Individual donors like you and me, who made, might donate a grocery bag of items or what have you, and started prioritizing healthy food. They also made some of those merchandising changes and behavioral nudges where they had food demos. And what they saw is, first of all, so much excitement from a lot of the parents who were program participants, because they said, if I had more money, I would buy fruit, fresh fruit. But fresh fruit is expensive. And so they were thrilled to be able to get fresh fruit for their kids. They were happy to have some instruction through Cooking Matters courses and Extension and through the demos that they were doing, so that when they got handed a couple stems of broccoli, they knew what to do with it, and they had the different seasonings and options, the ingredients they needed to make that recipe at home. So there's been some really exciting work with healthy food and hunger relief, and what Second Harvest has done in Northwest Arkansas is they've also created a model food shelf inside their food bank. So people who are eligible can go and use that food bank, but it's also a place where they can train food pantries across the region about how to set up their food pantry and how to provide these behavioral nudges and prompts. So it's also an educational tool for their member food pantries. One of the really amazing things that you have here in Florida at the state level is the Fresh Bucks program. So any farmer's market that would like to accept SNAP EBT can also sign up and have Fresh Bucks. Any farmer's market. And so for your farmer's markets here, you'll see typically with farmer's markets one of three scenarios. They don't accept SNAP EBT. There's even a special program for seniors who can, if they are eligible for federal food assistance, they actually have a special supplementary program that targets seniors so that they can shop and get produce at farmers markets. And then you'll also see, so for the farmers markets that do accept it, there's two scenarios. One, an individual vendor might say, I'll take your SNAP card. It's a ton of work for a small farmer to get that set up. The administration is a real headache. And so some farmers markets have said, you know, this has to be a win-win. It can't just be more of a burden for these very small farmers. We have to set up a system to absorb the administrative burden of what this takes. And so you'll see many farmers markets set up a system where if you're SNAP eligible, you can go stand in line, they swipe your SNAP card, you get a set of wooden tokens for the amount of market bucks that you can spend and the amount of dollars you want to spend off of your SNAP EBT card for produce, and then you give those tokens to the farmers around the market. The farmers turn those tokens in on Saturday. They get paid right away instead of waiting 60 days for the USDA to pay them, and then the market absorbs the administrative cost. My recommendation for this kind of policy effort is a fewfold. Number one, this is a great way to promote local food culture. It's a great way to promote local agriculture. It's a great way to promote healthy eating. We know that if people are shown what to do through demonstrations at farmers markets and they shop there, they will increase their consumption of fresh produce. And we know the more fresh produce you eat, the less your risk is of diet-related chronic diseases. The other thing I will say with SNAP EBT at farmers markets in Florida is one of the things you want to think about, food policy councils want to think about with their farmers markets, is making sure that these markets actually support local agriculture. Sometimes the markets are resellers of commercially grown produce that could be grown anywhere outside of Florida, or large farms that are really far away. And when we're thinking about food culture of local farmers markets, we want to make sure that we're thinking through how to best support our local vendors. Community gardens and urban agriculture. One of the things that's really important here, and you're blessed with a long growing season, and so creating policy that supports and encourages people growing their own food. Now, one of the interesting things as an outsider, I'm from another part of the country, as you know, is this whole thing about HOAs and local government and how many decisions get made inside HOAs, right, about land use. And so one of the neat things about the big P, little p paradigm that we have around policy change is the Food Policy Council can say, let's talk about and collaborate with HOAs so that they can make little p policy changes inside their own organization to promote and support things like urban agriculture and community garden. We also know there's a generational shift at play in these HOAs where people are interested in healthy eating, they're interested in delicious food, they're interested in food production. So there's also support and an interest by kind of a new generation of residents in HOAs to make these kinds of little p policy changes inside HOA communities. Okay. So I'm going to stop there. Is that okay? Yeah, and I'm just going to say a couple of things offhand. I've been working here in Southwest Florida with the Blue Zones Project now for a few years, and I'm really excited and think you're super well poised to do this work because of the wonderful research that Dr. Felke and others have done. You know what the challenges are, you know what some of the opportunities are because of the support of the regional planning organization. That is an effort in and of itself to create that kind of infrastructure of support. You already have that, which is incredible. You have Extension doing wonderful work on the nutrition side as well as on the local ag side. And you have state programs and some federal grant streams that are just waiting to support your work as the Food Policy Council moves forward. So remember my advice to you. Number one, make sure that you have the right representation at the table. Number two, have thyself a strategic plan with a set of clear policy priorities, including some easy wins, so that everybody gets used to how and why you make policy, because it takes a while to learn how to do this, and it takes some time for the community decision makers to get adjusted to, oh, right, we are making food policy here. We're doing this for ourselves. That's right. The third thing, make sure that there's staff support to ensure that your Food Policy Council is successful. And learn from others. And I tried to share some lessons learned from others. Do your homework to help inform good policy decisions, because then you're not spinning your wheels on strategies that might not work. If you're thoughtful, then you'll be successful. The flip side of this is do not drag your feet. Like, get rolling and start doing good work. When I was an inaugural member of Homegrown Minneapolis, the mayor, it was January, and the mayor said, I constitute you, I make my budget decisions in April. You have 4 months to develop your strategic plan. I want to see a list of every policy change that you want. 4 months. And I've worked with food policy councils. 3 years later, they're still kind of going, so what are we going to do? So I always say to food policy councils, there's nothing like a good deadline to get you rolling and identify your priorities. And we identified 76 policies that we wanted enacted And within the first 2 years, we got over 50 of them done, right? So if you are motivated, if you are strategic, if you are focused, if you are thoughtful, and if you're proactive, you can do a lot in a very short period of time to transform your food future. It doesn't take a long time to do some of these things. And then you've got an institutional body set up to continue to support and work and grow and foster and cultivate your food future. Thanks.
Thank you, Maggie. Does everyone feel empowered and excited about this now? All right, so we have a few, about 10 minutes left to ask any questions. So does anyone have any questions for any of our speakers this morning? Maggie, Tom, Jeff, Margaret, Rachel.
Is there contact information for all of them as far as email in case
You want to
we
say that?
have to reach out?
That's fine. Yeah, so what we can do is I can send everybody that signed up, I should have everyone's email address if you did it through Eventbrite, or when you registered at the front, when you signed in, and I can send out the slides, which should have everyone's contact information on those slides. Any other questions?
I just wonder about, is there a council in Lee County, for Lee County, do you know?
No, there isn't.
So how would we start doing that? That's what I would like
So
to
the
know.
plan is working with these folks. Again, we've been working over the last probably 3 years, trying to really strategically think about all these issues and really gain our partners. I see a lot of folks in our food policy committee. We've got Hunger Relief, again, Department of Health, FGCU, University of Florida, and we've really tried to think of, do we want to take it 5 counties underneath the Southwest Florida Regional Planning Council, or start with Lee and Collier, because we know food systems don't have boundaries like counties do. So the plan is to hopefully launch one in May. We're going to bring Maggie back to facilitate that launch in May of 2020. And it will start off as Lee and Collier. And then, as Maggie said, there's various ways a food policy council can work. The idea could be to split off, folks that are interested in focusing in Collier County, those that are interested in focusing on Lee County. But again, we'll have her back to help facilitate kind of that strategic plan, that mission statement, all of those different facets of a food policy council. So in the works. And that's why everybody should have your survey, fill it out. In that space, you'll see you can sign up if you are interested in being on a food policy council, if you're interested in staying informed about it. So make sure, again, don't forget to fill out your surveys, and we'll keep you informed.
Someone in the back.
Yeah. Elizabeth.
I think Dr. Maggie was reading my mind in the last point. I'm working with quite a few homeowners associations and also some condo associations. And so often with the prevalence of restrictive covenants that work against things like community gardens, are there some good examples, I guess, that any of you know of communities that have developed those types of maybe first policies within into the covenants? I'm working on redrafting about a dozen right now, so.
Sure. So I have 3 different answers to your question, and you may have some as well, Rachel. There are some really interesting developments on the island of Oahu, which has a similar climate to here, where they've used all edible landscaping inside their HOA. Not just in the common spaces like their parks and playground, but also each individual household. And what they've seen happen is the person with the macadamia nut tree down the street will swap for the mangoes. And so it started this wonderful community building effort, and then people teaching each other about how to care for these food plants as they go. And then they were very strategic about the kind of trees they planted in the common play spaces. And they have kind of gleaning and gathering days that the HOA supports, where people bring their kids and families, and it's become this wonderful community. So that's answer number 1. Answer number 2 is we're seeing some really interesting new kind of agrihood models of homeowners associations, where they're putting agriculture and food culture as central amenities of the agrihood. There's one on the docket. It hasn't been built in Greater Orlando by Lake Nona.
There's one down south that has been built.
There's one down south that has been
Or
built.
sorry, east.
And so with an organic farm there, with a farmer's market, with kind of farm to table eating options on site in some of the restaurants and snack bars. And then I also, if you want, follow up through Jessica and the city of Austin and some other HOA developers have policies and language in place that I've shared with Blue Zones communities that want to do this kind of work in HOAs. So there is a precedent out there, and some of it is that policy language. Some are some demonstrated kind of models of HOAs that are more food and health focused. And then some of them really are about, if you're landscaping, why not use landscaping that's food producing and health promoting? So there's a few different permutations of how you can do this that I've seen around the country.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I'll just put you in touch with the folks down at Arden who are doing the agrohood to see what information they can provide. Because Arden is the one with the organic farm at the center. This is in Wellington on the east coast of Florida. It's completed. It's already in operation. They've got 55 families collecting from the CSA now, with a plan to grow to 200 families collecting from the CSA. And then also in Orlando, they've got some really done some really groundbreaking work. So I was just going to connect you with somebody in Orlando who can also give you a really good answer. So I don't have answers to your questions, but I know folks.
You may want to look at Babcock Ranch too, which is up the road. I don't know the process or how far along they are, but they have some of those similar models.
And then Bobby.
Yeah, Dr. Felke, you made mention about social association. We don't seem to have that here. What is it? What does it look like? And how do we get it?
Right, so as I said before, one of the big problems that we see in this community is we don't really have those opportunities to kind of engage where we do in some more traditional urban environments, like what we actually call neighborhoods. You know, we don't really have neighborhoods here. Our neighborhoods here are very much defined by our gated communities. So we don't have the opportunity to cross over. Now, our youth do, because they're still going to school. But for example, my 8-year-old, he goes to school, he comes home on the bus, he's now in with those children. For me to take him elsewhere to have play dates, it probably means getting in the car, taking at least a 15-20 minute one-way drive to get him to another gated community to hang out and do that, right? Then add on the fact that they are all engaged on social media and that piece. So the loneliness project that I had mentioned that we had just done, pick up Florida Weekly, check out ABC 7 about how this happens, because this is not just something that affects our older adults, which is where we tend to see it. The ABC 7 piece, or the Florida Weekly piece, actually, in addition to the loneliness project, did a special insert on the faces of loneliness. And what you will see is it is all the way across the age spectrum, including a graduate student at FGCU. So it's this idea of it's possible to be lonely even though you're surrounded by a bunch of people, right? So that notion of loneliness and isolation is not different from what we talk about with food insecurity when we talk about being hungry versus being food insecure, right? So it's the same thing about feeling lonely versus being isolated. So we need to look at those concepts in a broader environment. The good news about this area, and again, where I think it dovetails nicely with some of this conversation, in addition to the broader conversation about the council, is the fact that research shows us that one of the best ways to kind of defeat these ideas of isolation and loneliness is through volunteering and helping others. So if we were able to get some of these things together where we are getting more engagement with our neighbors, where we have a larger opportunity to participate in things like community gardens, it's another great way for us to then combat things like loneliness and isolation while we're also addressing hunger and food insecurity. So that's why I said in my presentation, an idea like this with a Food Policy Council really gives us the opportunity to address a much wider spectrum of issues than just the direct pieces of food insecurity and hunger. You're welcome.
And I would say Blue Zones Project, shameless plug here, you know, one of the ways that we help others is to decrease social isolation. So that's really one huge part of the project. So we do have moais that we launched, walking moais. We just did a large potluck moai with the Today Show and Dan Buechner coming down. So we're trying to find those connections in HOAs. Your HOA, if you are part of an HOA, you can participate in the project. If you are part of a faith-based organization, that faith-based can participate in the project. And then you start cultivating that culture of help really around with your neighbors and decreasing that social isolation. So again, I just have to say, if you want more information, we do have it. We have all of our team here this morning too. If you'd like to have your HOA join Blue Zones Project, there's Shantae over there, faith-based organization. She does that as well, and I think David.
And I just want to say too, so just perhaps what if we had the district governor and past governor of Rotary in the room? Thank you for being here. So thinking about those organizations, Tom, that can connect people and bring a broad swath of folks, professionals, retired, young, old, et cetera, to the table. And Rotary's, their initiative right now is actually 10 million meals?
10 million meals.
10 million meals. So
it started November 1st, 2018, and it's actually going to go through June 30th of 2021. And Sandra and I have both decided they really need to up that number because we're going to hit 10 million way before then.
So again, kind of the magic, everybody coming together, marshaling forces. Thank you for being here.
Any other?
Yeah, I think it's the first time I wasn't familiar with Moai.
Yes, you got it in that one. So Moai, basically it came from Okinawa, but basically it's just a group of women they found in Okinawa when they were doing the research of the longest lived places in the world. And it was a group of women that raised their kids together and they stayed together for the rest of their life. And so we take that term now basically to mean, a togetherness, to reduce social isolation. So it's just an Okinawan term that we call it. Good call, Melissa. Any other questions for the speakers? Everybody good? Okay, so please don't forget, hand your survey to Nina or leave it at the front desk. If anybody hasn't gotten a Blue Zone bag, we have them as well, so you can grab one on your way out. And again, please stay in touch. If you want to be more informed, again, everybody should have my email address on the Eventbrite. Please reach out at any time. And I'll make sure you guys all have the slides from today's speakers. And once again, just thank you all so much for taking the time out of your busy, extremely busy, I know, schedules to join us this morning. Thank I'm just sad because it hit me. I was like, you know what?
We're done.
Oh, I
I'm gonna run something.
Oh, no, it doesn't
think everybody did that.